Douglass home for another look at that historical site. At 10 a.m., White House advisor George Stephanopoulos. He spoke this weekend to a meeting of the Yale Political Union. And that's the C-SPAN program schedule. Next, Washington Journal.
If you listen carefully on this Monday morning, President's Day, February 20th, you can hear the birds chirping in the background from our remote location over in Cedar Hill. And that's the Capitol in the background as Luis Munoz moves the camera around to what will soon be on your screen, a large White House sitting up on top of a hill in Anacostia here in Washington, D.C. in the southeast section. And that's the home in which Frederick Douglass, an abolitionist, former slave, died 100 years ago today. We'll talk with Bill Clark, a National Park Service ranger who knows all about that house in Frederick Douglass, in a few moments. And on our screen right now is I guess you'd call it a flyer. You can find this flyer, background material on a display of art and portraits of Frederick Douglass that's currently available for public viewing at the National Portrait Gallery, a part of the Smithsonian Institution here in Washington, and we'll talk more about that at the bottom of the hour. First, let's look at what's in the newspapers, and then we'll go back to Frederick Douglass's home and called Cedar Hill and talk to Bill Clark about who Frederick Douglass was and how many people visit that house. But let's look at the Baltimore Sun this morning. We have a guest coming up here in a few moments by the name of Christopher Hitchens and his brother Peter. And this is a column that probably will surprise Mr. Hitchens by Richard Rodriguez called Brit Twit. And among other things said in this column in the Baltimore Sun this morning is that Christopher Hitchens has traveled much. He has written books and magazine articles from the superiority of having been born in England. But alas, he is not famous. The truth is Mr. Hitchens is never going to be famous, but Mother Teresa is famous. We'll explain more of that when Mr. Hitchens joins us in a few moments. Here's the front page of the Washington Times. Their headline this morning is Chechnya Truce Ends with a Bang. Subhead, Both Sides Intransigent Again. And also on the cover is a picture from the celebration yesterday where the president spoke at the Iwo Jima statue over in Arlington, Virginia. And off to the left, a story we see in a lot of papers, Senator Smith. That's Senator Robert Smith, a Republican, conservative, gives Graham campaign jump start in New Hampshire. Looking at other papers, here's the front page of the New York Times. Tempering troubled waters. Myrlie Evers Williams, picture of her right there, the new chairman of the board by one vote of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. And there's lots of analysis in the papers this morning about that change over the weekend. USA Today subleads NAACP to fight GOP agenda is the headline, and another picture of Evers Williams. On the front page of the style section of the Washington Post, it's more about the big night in New Hampshire. Richard Lugar, Robert Dornan, Alan Keyes, Lamar Alexander, Arlen Specter, Phil Graham. And this is Steve Dupre, who is the chairman of the GOP party in the state of New Hampshire. That event covered on C-SPAN Live, C-SPAN 2 last night. More and more pictures. This is Senator Smith and Phil Graham. This is the Washington Post, and this is the jump story from the style section piece in which Kim Masters followed around Steve Dupre, the chairman of the GOP. And here's the front page of Philadelphia Inquirer, another story from the New Hampshire event. New Hampshire meets the GOP field. Obviously, Senator Phil Graham, they're on the front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer. And finally, from the Inquirer, Dole warns White House on Foster fight. And one more little item here. This is because it is President's Day. There are often columns like this. This is a Paul Greenberg column. He's from the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, and also Ken Edelman, a columnist. Both gentlemen have been guests on this program, and a political cartoon from United Features Syndicate Go ahead, Abe, put it on, and you can see here it's Happy Birthday, George and Abe. This is one of those composite dates in American history where you celebrate both Abraham Lincoln's birthday from the 12th of February and George Washington's birthday, which is the 22nd of February. Bill Clark is a ranger at the Frederick Douglass home in Anacostia. Good morning, Mr. Clark, and who was Frederick Douglass?
Well, good morning, Brian. Mr. Douglass was a 19th century abolitionist, born a slave and was a slave for 20 years. But what you see behind me is a crowning achievement to what he was able to do after becoming educated and liberated. Mr. Douglass believed that education was the key to freedom, and what you see behind me, Cedar Hill, his estate, is a crowning glory to that achievement.
How long have you been associated with the home?
Well, I've been here about a year and a half, almost 2 years now, Brian, and I've been with the Park Service about 25 years now.
If someone came to Washington and they were at the Capitol, and we just showed a picture of the Capitol in its relationship to the home, how long would it take them to get over to the home?
Well, I tell you, Mr. Douglass used to take that walk, and it took him about 45 minutes to an hour. But if you were to drive only that 2.5 to 3 miles, it would take you about 5 minutes from the Capitol.
How old was Frederick Douglass when he died?
Well, he was 77 years old.
And where did he die?
He died here at Cedar Hill, right near the dining room door. In fact, right there in the hallway, you might say.
I know later we'll have a chance to see more inside the house, but Frederick Douglass, as I understand it, was born in Talbot County, Maryland, but no one's quite sure what date he was born on. How come?
Well, that's because it was customary in those times not to tell a slave when he was born. He would normally say something like harvest time, sowing time, cold time, whatever. But in Mr. Douglass's case, after he died, we found a ledger that told who the slaves were on the plantation. And he was listed as being young Frederick, John of Harriet Bailey, February 1818. Now, he took the date February 14th because the last time he saw his mother, it was Valentine's Day, and she gave him some heart-shaped cookies.
How many people come to the Frederick Douglass home every year?
Well, we've been averaging about 60,000 a year, but this year, the centennial of his life and times, we believe we'll have roughly 70 to maybe even 80,000 people this year.
In your opinion, what's the most important thing he did when he was living?
The most important thing he did was show people that through education and a simple belief in each other, that they could become much more acquainted, much more enjoyable, and even learn from each other. And then equality being the key factor of everyone living together.
Where were you born?
I was born actually over in Virginia, in Culpeper, Virginia.
Now, when you were growing up and in school, did anybody teach you about Frederick Douglass?
No, they didn't. In fact, for the most case, if you were to go right down south right now, I've talked to many teachers down in North Carolina and South Carolina. They've told me that they would find maybe a paragraph or two on Frederick Douglass.
How come?
Well, we just don't know. We just don't know. Maybe it's a thing whereas other history of America is more important to some school districts. We just don't know. But what we're trying here at the Frederick Douglass National Historic Site and with the National Park Service is to enlighten more people to why they should want to learn about equal rights, the anti-slavery movement, and especially about Frederick Douglass and his reasoning for wanting to learn.
How well did Frederick Douglass know Abraham Lincoln?
Well, I would say he knew him quite well because they had very similar beginnings. They both were not allowed to go to school for the most part. They both were self-educated, but yet achieved a great deal on their own, using their own power to get ahead. And as you know, Mr. Lincoln became a very great emancipator and president of our country, and Mr. Douglass became a great leader of his people.
You know, one of the things, Bill Clark, I've noticed in traveling around the country and visiting some of the different presidential libraries and some of the presidential homes is that there are very few African Americans that you find at these places. And the reason I bring this up is I know when I visited you over there in the home a year or so ago, I asked you how many white people come to Frederick Douglass's home, and I think you told me something like it's a 90% African American, 10% visitorship here at the home. Is that still true? And if so, why do you think?
No, sir, it's not true. In fact, had you come here yesterday, you would have noticed about 50-50. In fact, our visitation has become demographically changed quite a bit since we've been giving out more information about Mr. Douglass, his first wife, Anna Mary Douglass, and his second wife, Helen Pitts Douglass, who was not a person of color. And many people are beginning to realize that equal rights are a key factor to our country becoming stronger. And they're coming here to learn more about how Frederick Douglass overcame those terrible years when everyone believed that racism was a key factor to making this country right. And they're learning here that it's wrong.
What are we going to see when we go inside in a few minutes?
you're going to see 90 to 95% of the original artifacts that Mr. Douglass owned, that his first wife Anna Murray owned, and that his second wife Helen Pitts Douglass owned. And I might remind you, Brian, that it was because of Helen Pitts Douglass, his second wife, and her creation of the Frederick Douglass Memorial and Historical Association, and with the help of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs, that this site with the National Park Service was able to maintain itself as it is today.
I read over the weekend that Abraham Lincoln liked Frederick Douglass so much that he wanted him to have something after his death, and Mary Todd Lincoln gave a walking stick. Is that over there in the house?
That's correct. In fact, it's not in the house, Brian. We have it on exhibit down in our visitor center. We have a very nice visitor center with a theater where you can see an orientation film on Mr. Douglass. We have an outstanding bookstore that's operated by our Parks and History Association, and we have books on Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, the history of America, the history of the Civil War, the history of the Westward Movement. We have just so much information here for everyone, but that cane is exceptional, as well as many other walking sticks in our library that Mr. Douglass used to walk from here to the U.S. Capitol building.
Where is Frederick Douglass buried?
Well, he's buried up in Rochester, New York, with his young daughter Annie, who died at 10, his first wife Anna Murray, and his second wife Helen Pitts.
How many children did he have?
Well, he had 5 children, but his poor daughter Annie died at 10 years old, and his other children, his other 4, lived on. He had Rosetta, the oldest daughter. He had Charles, Raymond. He had Louis. He had Frederick Jr.
Bill Clark, Ranger of the National Park Service, will be back visiting with you a little later on in this program.
Fantastic. See you later.
And our cameras will stay there all morning long, and we'll be back taking a look at the Frederick Douglass home called Cedar Hill. Let's go to the phones, and our first caller in this open phone segment is from Orlando, Florida. Good morning.
Good morning.
What's on your front page? Do you have one yet?
Yes, I have one here.
The Orlando Sentinel?
The Orlando Sentinel.
What's the big news down there today?
It says, well, they're worried about tourism. Officials, they're worried about a tourist boycott.
Tourism boycott where? At
Tampa, because of the, they're thinking about passing an ordinance. Let's see, on March 7th, the voters in Tampa will decide whether to repeal a portion of the city's human rights ordinance that protects the rights of homosexuals if voters say yes to referendum number 1. All signs point to a boycott of Tampa with the potential loss of millions of dollars in travel business.
Are there any stories on the front page about the big Republican event last night in Manchester, New Hampshire?
No, there isn't for some strange reason.
Any politics at all on that page?
No politics at all on the front page. It says rain doesn't dampen fans' excitement at the race, and officials study shakeup of NASA.
Now, what gets you up at this hour of the morning and watching television?
Well, you don't really know this, but I've been trying to reach you now for 2 years.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, I was recovering from cancer surgery back in 92, and I was hooked up to a machine, and you were my babysitter 8 hours a day.
How did you get through this morning?
This is the first, I don't know. I just dialed and I got through.
Any quick comments you'd like to make on the national political scene?
Yes. I think it's about time somebody told Clinton the truth, about the election. For some reason, he doesn't realize that people do want to change.
All right, sir. Thanks a lot for calling. You're looking at a picture of Pennsylvania Avenue, the old post office spire there in the top left. Our camera's over on the Capitol grounds looking down the mall area, and as you probably know by now, our President's Day interview with President Clinton is due up this evening. First run will be 8 o'clock, a half-an-hour interview about what this president, Bill Clinton, thinks about other presidents and lots of other things. Zanesville, Ohio, what's in the paper this morning?
Well, I haven't really read the newspaper yet this morning.
What's the matter with you?
Well, I usually go out and get the Columbus Dispatch and haven't gotten out yet.
Too early, huh?
Yes, but I do have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I do appreciate C-SPAN. I watch it every day, and I think it's wonderful. But I would like to know why we can't find anything in the newspapers or haven't heard anything on radio or on television, only on radio, about the International Treaty for the Rights of the Child that's up for ratification.
I don't have the answer to that, but I'd certainly be glad to look for it and bring it up here on the program.
Well, I wish you would, because for about a week now they've been talking about it on radio, but there's been nothing in any of the newspapers or any of the magazines or on any TV, and it really puzzles me.
Well, thanks a lot for bringing it to our attention.
Okay.
We go to Cleveland, Ohio on a President's Day where this town is virtually shut down. No one works in Washington on this federal holiday except those that absolutely have to be here. Go ahead, Cleveland.
Good morning, Brian.
Good morning.
Well, we have a large front page picture of a fellow with the caption here, ending a long, painful impasse, Bay Village, which is a suburb of Cleveland. Bay Village veteran seals promise to find soldiers' remains in Vietnam, and it's a story that goes on to tell about an area veteran here that went back to Vietnam and exchanged information on MIAs of the Vietnamese and showed them burial sites for their war dead.
What's the date? Is the dateline Vietnam, or is it in Cleveland or Bay City?
Pardon me?
What's the dateline on it up at the top? Is it, where did they write it from?
They wrote it here from Cleveland after the fellow returned. And then right next to it is a picture of Bill Clinton in front of the Iwo Jima monument, which is I find pretty ironic. As a veteran of Vietnam, every time I see this fellow, and a former Marine, it's to me this is almost sacrilegious to see him standing in front of the Iwo Jima monument.
Is it the same
eulogy?
Same picture that you see on your screen there right now?
Yes, it is.
That's a Washington Post picture, and it's on the front page of the Washington Post.
Yes. As a Vietnam veteran, you know, I've heard over and over again people trying to justify Mr. Clinton's actions during the era of the draft of the '60s, and I think maybe I can try to explain the feeling of some veterans, our perspective. You know, we don't hold, or I don't hold it against him for protesting the war, but we think that that he actually committed treason by his actions in England and surrounding himself with some of the ultra radicals of that era. One of them was David Ishvin. David Ishvin, if you do or do not know, went actually to North Vietnam in 1970 and signed a peace treaty with the North Vietnamese, and then made radio broadcasts, propaganda broadcasts for the North Vietnamese. And this is documented. And this fellow was on Clinton's campaign staff as a very high official. Now, you know, what we feel, many of us, is that through Mr. Clinton's actions, he gave the enemy aid and comfort and incentive to keep fighting, boosted their morale, and in my opinion, probably prolonged the war and cost a lot of American and Vietnamese lives.
All right, Cleveland, thanks for the call. You're looking at a picture down the mall, and that building there off on the right that we had a close-up of earlier is the headquarters of the Smithsonian Institution, and also the Woodrow Wilson Center is based there. As we read earlier, this column is in today's Baltimore Sun called Brit Twit, and Christopher Hitchens will be able to defend himself when he gets out here along with his brother Peter Hitchens. But in this piece, Richard Rodriguez writes that Mr. Hitchens belongs among that generation of British journalists and editors, amoral aliens who have invaded New York and Washington. These expats are like characters from a minor Evelyn Waugh novel. They are craven and coarse and contemptuous of the colonials. In New York, the knaves edit he and she magazines, fashion magazines. They disport themselves in political journals, but the great Brit obsession is with fame. We'll have a chance. I'm sure Mr. Hitchens was not aware that this column will be written on the day he appears here, but we'll have a chance to ask him about that at the bottom of the hour. Peter Hitchens, usually on the conservative side, Christopher Hitchens on the liberal side, or they can define themselves when they get out here. Brothers from Great Britain on this show in about, less than 15 minutes. Palm Harbor, Florida. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Brian, and thank you for C-SPAN.
Good morning, and what's, you got a paper this morning?
I was commenting on the Mike Wallace interview last night of Phil Gramm on 60 Minutes.
And what'd you think?
I thought it was pretty good, but I thought that Mike Wallace, whom I do consider a liberal, played the race card in commenting or asking Phil Gramm to comment on what do you think America would react to a president and his wife of mixed marriage.
By the way, you say you consider him a liberal. You know, he was a very good friend, and I'm not absolutely sure of how good a friend, but supposedly was a good friend of Richard Nixon's and was offered the press secretary's job in the White House. He was also a good friend of Mrs. Reagan's, and his son wrote a book about the White House during, I think it was Mrs. Reagan's time, maybe it was Mrs. Bush's time. How sure are you that he's a liberal?
Well, I use that term. He's of a classic liberal. I would even consider Richard Nixon probably one of the most liberal Republicans of our century.
Well, what do you think of Phil Gramm then?
Phil Gramm, I think, is a great conservative, and I think he'd make a great president. And I really like the way that he handled it. He didn't blink. He didn't. He wasn't taken back on anything that Mike threw at him.
What did you think of the technique of having the television camera there and have him look at the television and see what he looked like on television and then comment on what Phil Gramm thought about how Phil Gramm looked like on television?
I thought that was kind of cute. I would have appreciated if they did it with Bill Clinton earlier and maybe had pictures of all of Bill Clinton's girlfriends.
Miami, Florida, you're next. Go ahead, please.
Thank you.
You're on the air.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Calling from Miami.
Yes, sir.
Reading the Miami Herald today.
Let me tell our audience while you're doing that, though, that we have a camera today over at the Frederick Douglass home, and we also have a camera. This one is down on the mall, and the Frederick Douglass camera right now on the lawn there is looking at the Capitol, and you can see it there through the morning skies. Now go ahead, sir. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. I enjoyed that little piece on Frederick Douglass. I'm afraid many of us didn't know much about him when we were growing up.
Well, we hope to before this morning's over, and we've got about 2 hours and a half left. We're going to learn a lot more about him. What do you have in the Miami Herald this morning?
Well, the Miami Herald, I want to congratulate them. They actually have 2 articles today that relate to the national news. One thing about the Miami Herald, they rarely have anything of national interest on the front page. It's the old story of the only wheel in town. On the right-hand side, they have 9 GOP hopefuls, get ready, get set. New Hampshire debate is start of the race. And in the middle, they have the true definition of courage. Clinton leads 50-year tribute to costly victory on Pacific Isle.
Where do you come down in the politics these days?
These days, I'm on the right.
Have you been on the left?
Oh, back in my early days when I was in the Army, I think I was on the left. I used to read things like The Militant and The Nation. You remember The Militant?
I don't remember the Militant, but our guest coming up here in a few moments is a writer in The Nation, and that Nation is going to be on your screen there in just a moment. Why did you stop reading The Nation?
Because my views changed as I got married, got children, got older, and I began to get more conservative. I lived in a section of the country, I should say a city, where the Republicans seem to be a little bit in the dominance, although Essex County, New Jersey, naturally splits down the middle, pretty much.
Why are you watching this time of morning?
Why?
Yeah, what brings you to this show at this time on this day?
I try and watch your show every morning. I enjoy it. It's something that I like to look at before I get dressed. I'm retired now. I'm not working. And while I try and do a few things at home, such as do a little writing and things like that, I get a perspective from you folks of impartiality that I really enjoy.
Thank you, Miami, for calling. In this morning's New York Times, there's a picture of John F. Kennedy's son. You can see right there, John F. Kennedy, Jr., and a fellow by the name of Michael Berman right here. And the headline on this Deidre Carmody column is Politics as Entertainment, Politics Even as Play. And it's an announcement of a new magazine in which Mr. Kennedy's been involved in the creation of, called George. And it's all about politics. He says we want to make politics sort of entertaining. If it is entertaining, people are going to be interested in it. And if they are interested in it, they might think more about it. And maybe they might involve themselves. And we'll talk more about that when Peter and Christopher Hitchens join us. But first, back to Florida. We seem to have a lot of Florida callers this morning. Tampa. Good morning.
Good morning, Brian.
Tampa Tribune. You have it yet this morning?
No, I haven't been down to the corner yet, but I got a poem about Iwo Jima I'd like to read.
Please do.
Iwo Jima, that rapid mount, rampant crowned with American flag, lofted by spree of men so gallant, across that azure ocean, under an azure sky, those arrived home in white room of marble slabs, grievously met at the stations, stones chiseled row after row. Forgotten days, no voice stirs, carved memorabilia stateside reminiscent stands tall. That omniscient tower, statue, hot soundless, ever burn, ever sleep.
Were you in the military in the World War II?
No, I was drafted in '69.
What did you write that poem?
Yes, sir. I wrote that poem. My dad was in 6 campaigns, 3 major under MacArthur.
And when did you write the poem?
4 years ago, and today it's been answered. This week it has been answered.
All right, sir. Thank you very much for calling us with that this morning. Des Moines, Iowa, you're next. What's on your mind?
Well, I was just reading this morning's Des Moines Register, and the front page, the top story is a local story on an interstate, but the article that I was interested in is the events in New Hampshire last night, and it was just the article was going over the different issues on which Republicans disagree. I think the focus of the article could have been on how we need to get rid of Bill Clinton, liberal politics, and advancing the Republican agenda in general.
Here's the front page of the New York Times, where they have a picture of Lamar Alexander and Phil Gramm and Bob Dole, and the lead article there by Richard Burke, Politicians Start Year-Long Siege of New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. Did you watch last night?
I did not. Unfortunately, our local cable outlet does not have C-SPAN 2, so I couldn't watch it.
I'm sorry to hear that. Well, we actually had it on C-SPAN 1, then later on. We ran it live on C-SPAN 2, and then between 9:30 and 11 had it on had the tape version on.
Oh, darn it. Had I known that, I would have taped it.
I'm sure, I'm not absolutely sure, but I suspect that sometime during this day you'll see that again.
Okay, great.
Great. Well, thanks a lot for the call. We're going to take one more quick call here, and then talk to Joe Hebert of the Associated Press, and then have the Hitchens brothers here. Lindenhurst, Illinois, what's on your mind this morning?
Good morning, Brian.
Good morning.
I was just reading in the Tribune about the GOP series of speeches last night, and they didn't seem to point to any clear front-runner aside from Dole leading in the polls. But I just wanted to kind of throw out a little thesis there that maybe President Clinton was a secret Republican, because he seems to be the only man capable of galvanizing the party to get into the election results that it did in November. And it's really something that, due to what he's done the past 2 years, that the thing last night could even be relevant. But normally this would just not have gotten a lot of coverage, and there would be, it's a long way from the election. But I also wanted to say your book notes with Jimmy Carter was wonderful. I just got through watching it here out in near Chicago in Lindenhurst.
What was your reaction to him?
Oh, very surprising, because I'm not, I know him through the news media, and over the years reading him through magazines and newspapers, and I have a completely different opinion of him now. He's just a wonderful man. The show was very, very good, and I just found out a lot of things about him that I never would have known otherwise.
All right. Well, great. I'm glad you enjoyed it, and thank you very much for calling this morning. We're going to have a break here in a moment, but first, Joe Hebert of the Associated Press. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Brian.
Tell us about the Interior Department's budget. How much is it going to be for this next fiscal year?
Well, they're asking for about $7.6 billion, and that's just a little bit more than what they're getting this year. Interior Secretary Babbitt, he likes to say that it's also almost identical to what they had 2 years ago. And he has told a number of appropriations committee hearings in the Congress that most of the money that they spend there is for people and for operations, so there's not a lot of room to cut.
What does the Interior Department do?
Well, they're basically the government's land managing department. They have jurisdiction over 270 million acres of federal land. At the BLM, they have, they run the nation's parks.
So when we're over at the Frederick Douglass home this morning and we're talking to Bill Clark, who's a ranger, is his salary paid through the Interior Department?
It is. That's one of the, they got 80,000 employees, including park rangers and scientists and things of that sort.
What is your prediction as to what will happen to the president's budget for the Interior Department this coming fiscal year?
Well, I think what Babbitt is concerned about is that he's going to find Congress wanting to cut it. In fact, what he's really concerned about is they may want to eliminate some entire offices and bureaus. Whether or not they'll be successful in that, I don't know. Probably not. But he's been on the campaign trail, sort of, defending the science departments. That is the U.S. Geological Survey, U.S. Biological Survey. His argument is that you need scientists to look at things like, the U.S. Geological Survey makes predictions on earthquakes, things like that.
What kind of shape is he personally in with the Congress? What do they think of him? The Republican Congress and a Democrat named Bruce Babbitt.
Well, Babbitt's been under attack for 2 years on his grazing philosophy, and from Western senators, conservatives in the West. The Republican takeover didn't help him any. He's been, and he's been up on the Hill lately. He's realized that it's a new ball game, and he's pulled back from some of his proposals. Recently, he abandoned completely the idea to raise grazing fees out west. These are fees the government charges ranchers to raise cattle and sheep on federal land. So he is trying to be conciliatory. And some people say that's one reason he's being that way is because he's trying to protect his turf. He's trying to keep them from cutting into the budget any more than necessary.
Joe Hebert, how long have you been writing for the Associated Press?
Well, this month it'll be 25 years.
Where's hometown originally?
Originally, I was born in Austria, but I grew up in the Midwest. Went to the University of Missouri, got a journalism degree there. My father was in the Army, so we bounced around a lot.
Thank you very much for joining us on this President's Day.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Peter Hitchens is a writer for the Daily Express over in Great Britain, and his brother Christopher Hitchens are going to be here in a moment. Here's what Peter Hitchens' paper looks like, and it says right up here at the top, Peter Hitchens, Our Man in Washington. That's a picture of Marion Barry, the mayor of Washington, D.C., and by the way, he lives in the same area, Anacostia, where the Frederick Douglass home is. And we're going to be back there. You can see it on your screen right there. Frederick Douglass's home called Cedar Hill. We're going to join Bill Clark as the morning goes on to talk about Frederick Douglass and what this home is all about and how you visitors to Washington can go visit this home. It's not very far from where we are right now. We've been over there a couple of times. It's an easy drive. And we'll talk more about that. And also, you can see here on the screen is a pamphlet that you can buy if you go down to, or not buy, they give this away to you if you go down to the Portrait Gallery, which is about 7-8 blocks from here. And that's Frederick Douglass in a younger time. He died when he was 77 years old. We're going to show you what the display at the Smithsonian's Portrait Gallery looks like, and then be back with Christopher and Peter Hitchens in about 6 or 7 minutes.
Frederick Voss, curator and historian here at the National Portrait Gallery. Who was Frederick Douglass?
Well, I guess the short answer is that he was the best known, most respected African-American figure of his day, of the 19th century. And the longer answer is that he was a reformer, not just in terms of abolition and the anti-slavery movement, but he was a supporter also of the women's movement and a number of other reforms.
When was he born?
He was born in 1818.
And when did he begin his life as someone who was fighting slavery?
He got into it slowly. He escaped from slavery in September of 1838 and settled in New Bedford, Massachusetts, where he came in contact with anti-slavery agitators and gradually learned about the anti-slavery movement and began to speak at meetings and so on. And then in 1841 he was asked to speak at a statewide Massachusetts abolitionist meeting in Nantucket, where he rather entranced his audience with his speaking ability and his capacity to describe the evils of slavery firsthand. And from then on, he became a leading abolitionist speaker.
How was Frederick Douglass educated?
Most of his education came from his own effort. One of his surrogate mistresses, Sophia Auld, gave him some lessons in the basic 3 R's when he was about 8 or 9 years old. But those lessons came to a halt fairly shortly because her husband disapproved of education for a slave. But he had gained enough knowledge in those lessons to pursue his education largely on his own. And he went quite a ways on that.
Didn't he even have his own newspaper at some time in his life?
Well, right. His self-education efforts enabled him to become quite a capable newspaper editor and writer.
Did he ever meet Abraham Lincoln?
Oh, yes. He met him several times during the Civil War, and Lincoln consulted with him on some issues. And I would say that Douglass had a love-hate relationship with with Lincoln. Well, Lincoln was the quintessential political pragmatist, and political timing was one of his most effective weapons. And Douglass, as far as the slave issue was concerned, didn't care about political timing. He was indifferent to that, as you might expect. And on the issue of emancipation of the slaves, he was quite irate with Lincoln's slowness in taking that action.
If someone comes to Washington, they can visit Frederick Douglass's home because it's located here. Was it unusual for someone of Frederick Douglass's stature to be able to own a home like that and own land in his day?
Well, it certainly was unusual for an African American to have quite as splendid a layout as he did here in Washington. It wasn't so much that the house was so large, but it was set on this hill that gives it a seigneurial splendor that just doesn't quit. It really is a beautiful sight. And yes, it certainly was unusual. And after the Civil War, in certain parts of the country, it still wasn't easy for, even if blacks had the money, for them to buy land. In fact, on Frederick Douglass's own native eastern shore of Maryland, there was an very active conspiracy to prevent blacks from acquiring land.
What was Frederick Douglass the man like?
That's hard to answer. Frederick Douglass was a public man, and he very rarely let his guard down, at least for posterity. And as an example, in his later autobiographies, he mentions his wife, his first wife, only once or twice in that home memoir, and then it's just in passing. So we don't even know what his feelings about his relationship with his wife was. And he didn't give himself away, partly because he was a 19th century man, and partly because his guard was always up, because he was an African American in a society that did not readily accept African Americans on an equal level.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal continues now with our newspaper roundtable discussion.
Christopher Hitchens, what are you reading on this President's Day?
I'm reading a heart-sinking story on the front page of the Washington Post. Actually, it's on the front page of most of today's papers, about everyone in the Republican leadership going up to New Hampshire. I'm really depressed that my profession would go up for this Groundhog Day non-event. I think it's ridiculous to start this New Hampshire cycle when, for the first time in a long time, and perhaps for good, we'll have the California primary decide all this really quite early on and put all these boring pundits and hangers-on out of business quite early and maybe get a decision quite soon. But you can tell they want to cling to the security blanket of this irrelevant, preposterous, boring little primary. And everything that happens there up there seems to be news to them. It's not news at all. It's absolutely manufactured news, and I think it's a horrible way to start my week.
Peter Hitchens, what about you?
Well, much more interesting than that was the Democratic primary, which seemed to be taking place on the front pages of the Washington Post and the New York Times over the past 3 days, where they've each been running long pieces saying how wonderful Al Gore is, how loyal he's been to the president, and what a tough thing it's been for him to be so loyal.
Where does that come from, by the way? I mean, I noticed that both the New York Times and the Washington Post both had stories about Al Gore at the same time.
Almost identical. It was the most extraordinary thing. Suddenly Al Gore emerges as the next Democratic candidate, I thought, and it must have given the Clinton White House a terrible shiver down their spines, the worst thing since they discovered how many abortions Henry Foster had conducted.
What else are you reading?
What else am I reading? Well, the stories in the Washington Times, two of them, they're both wire service stories, but seem to be interesting ones. Chechnya truce ends with a bang. I thought that I'd bring this up because of the extraordinary nonsense that's been talked about Chechnya over the past few weeks because of the television coverage it's been getting. And another wonderful snippet in the same paper, on page A7, Clinton bears soul on humility, in which he says that he's proud to be more humble than the rest of us.
Where did he say this?
Yeah, I think he said this on CBS in an interview probably being given or broadcast as we speak. But it's the White House have thoughtfully, or CBS have thoughtfully put this out in advance so we know what the core of his feelings is.
Well, this story it's an Associated Press story, as you can see here, but it's small. Why did that get your attention?
There was just something about it. It reminded me of the story of the potential priest being interviewed by his bishop and saying, "Well, humility is my strong suit." There was something incredibly ridiculous about it, and it's one thing that leaps out of the page.
The president was telling us just the other day how much comfort he takes from the Psalms, if you remember, Brian, and that was a few days after he'd invited some therapists and feel-good people out to Camp David. I remember thinking to myself, I'd really like to go to one of his press conferences and say, "Mr. President, could you quote the bit from the Psalms that means the most to you?"
You know, we invite you both here because you are allegedly on other sides of the issues, and now you both are just this morning saying negative things about our president. Where do you both come down? First of all, so the audience has never seen the two of you together. Brothers, politically, what would you call yourself?
Conservative.
Hard left.
And why do you both have the same kind of comments about President Clinton?
Well, our mother didn't raise no fools, Mr. Lamb. I mean, there's no... We were brought up to be able to tell a phony when we saw one, and I certainly, I didn't know what Peter was going to make of it. I think at the time he was still living in Moscow. But I went to New Hampshire very early on in the last campaign, and I thought the big story, the big unwritten headline was, horrible phony wants to be president, has consensus already wrapped up in press and among fundraisers, fix in for phony. I wrote that and wrote it and wrote it and wrote it. Now people come up to me and say, well, wish we'd listened to you the first time. But they always say that to me. So.
But you know that you're being raked over the coals this morning yourself by an American journalist.
And yesterday morning, too.
Where was yesterday morning?
In the San Francisco Examiner.
Same
story, yeah.
Do you know Richard Rodriguez?
I don't, but until yesterday I was a bit of a fan of his. He's a good writer, a gifted writer. He's Mexican-American. He's a homosexual. He writes well about both of these experiences. He wrote a very interesting sort of dialogue with his father. A very good interview recently by him in Reason magazine. So I was very shocked to find that he can be a nativist, a bigot, and an ignoramus, as he proves himself to be today. He attacks, really, what he says about my piece on Mother Teresa, which is a critique of Mother Teresa, as the viewers should know. is that it's written by an English person, which is wrong, because English people shouldn't be doing that, and that it's in a Condé Nast magazine called Vanity Fair. If he hadn't got those two criticisms to make of me, it seems he would have no reply, and I think that's sad, and I think it's pathetic that Mexican Americans should play with nativist sentiment as well.
Did you read this about your brother?
Yes, I did.
And what did you think of it?
Well, I don't want to get involved in a brother-to-brother personal argument, and this seemed to me to be it was a very ad hominem, and I think it's the wrong way to conduct an argument, to attack the person who makes the point, and I really don't feel that it's sensible for me to get involved in the kind of slanging that this person indulges in.
Let me share with the audience what exactly some of what's been said, so they know it's hard. It's a long piece in the Baltimore Sun. Here's a little bit. We've got it on what we call the Chiron, so everybody can read it together. Mr. Hitchens belongs among that generation of British journalists and editors, amoral aliens who have invaded New York and Washington. These expats are like characters from a minor Evelyn Waugh novel. They are craven and coarse and contemptuous of the colonials. In New York, the knaves edit he and she fashion magazines. They disport themselves in political journals, but the great Brit obsession is with fame. Let me just ask you, because they're writing about your brother, what do you think of that?
Obsession with fame? I don't think any of us is particularly obsessed with fame. I think there is one point in there that he does make about the implied attitude of Americans towards British people, that we can get away here with things that we wouldn't be able to get away with at home, because somehow or other the British accent, the implied superiority, gets a response in people which it shouldn't do. There's some fairness in that, but that's a criticism of the United States, not of us.
I mean, obviously, one can't expect to write an attack on Mother Teresa without being attacked in one's turn. But it was surprising to me that I was attacked in the sort of tones that I sometimes get from callers on this show, which are basically, you know, why don't you go home if that's the way you feel, sort of talk. And I, of course, am delighted to be disliked by the sort of people who don't like immigrants. But the sort of people who write like that or speak like that are generally people who have nothing good to say about anyone called Rodriguez. So, as I say, I thought it was sordid and depressing. And it didn't engage with any of my points against the old witch herself, you see.
The old witch herself. That's Mother Teresa you're talking about.
The woman calling herself, styling herself Mother Teresa, yes. I mean, it's neither a name nor a title as far as I can see.
Yeah, the New York Times...
It's just what she's got everyone to call her, like Dr. Kissinger, you know. Half the battle is in getting people to call you what you want to be called.
Now, Walter Goodman, who reviews television for the New York Times, reviewed the Channel 4 show in Great Britain, that's not even been seen in the United States, about this show months after it ran, I believe. Why did he feel the need to do that?
Mr. Goodman, I thought, is a very sporting guy, by the way. I hadn't known him before. I thought of him as rather a political foe of mine, a bit of a neoconservative. He wrote a very decent piece, I thought, in the Times, saying, why is it that such a show could never be contemplated on American TV, even though PBS is always being attacked for being riddled with leftism and atheism and the rest of it. He said no one would even pretend that such a show would ever be on, but he said it might be worth asking why that is, and issued a challenge to 60 Minutes and the rest of them. And I have had some calls, and I hope we might get the expose on the air.
Peter,
meanwhile, if you wonder what I don't like or what you don't know and should about Ma Teresa, you should buy the relevant copy of Vanity Fair, where it's mainly laid out.
What month?
Last one, the one that just went off the stands. It has Brad Pitt on the cover. Well, you know who Brad Pitt is. You're au courant with Brad Pitt? No. He's the new young sex bomb.
Not courant with Brad Pitt, I'm sorry.
No, never mind. Legends of the Fall, that cover.
Yes, I did see.
Okay, then you can find out all the things you don't know but ought to about Mother Teresa in there.
All right, Peter Hitchens, you brought some past articles this morning, and it came in this red... I don't know what you call it, the little thing. You know, you carry it in.
It's my good luck.
The reason I asked this is because when I was handed all this, it said this came from Madame Ceausescu's office. Did you steal this?
I looted it from her office.
Who was she, by the way?
She was the appalling Nicolae Ceausescu's wife and co-dictator of Romania, known to the people as the scientist in a rather sinister fashion. I was going through the palace after the fall of Ceausescu, and there it was on her desk, and there was an armed soldier saying, "Don't touch anything," so I couldn't resist the temptation of snatching it from under his nose. And there it is, and I'm rather pleased with it.
Inside were some clips from your newspaper, the International Express, which people can buy in the States.
Yes.
But if they lived in Great Britain, they'd buy the Daily Express.
That's right, yeah.
Here's a piece from a couple of, I don't see the date on it. As a matter of fact, maybe you can tell us when you wrote it. It's all about last week. All about Colin Powell. Why did you think this would be of interest to people in Great Britain?
Well, because I think people are gripped by the possibility of Colin Powell being President of the United States. They think that after what's been going on for the past couple of years, somebody as straightforward and obviously clean as Colin Powell would be a great change, and they're also fascinated by the possibility of a black president. And I went to a speech that he gave at the Kennedy Center, and I have to say I was rather disappointed, because I'd had a very high opinion of Colin Powell, and I thought that his grasp of foreign policy verged on the naive, amongst other things, and felt that it was time to start casting doubt on this.
The black president born in the British West Indies, furthermore.
Not born.
Not born?
Family.
Couldn't be
Family.
president.
Couldn't be president, of course.
Families, I believe, from Jamaica.
Families, yes. I correct myself, but you see what I mean.
Born in the South Bronx.
With roots in, yes.
You know, he will not allow, in most cases, television cameras to cover him when he speaks, and because we've tried many times and during this period where he's making these speeches. And the reason I bring it up is I want to ask you, because we can't see him speak, what's his speech like?
It was almost a stand-up comedian turn. He makes a lot of jokes about himself, which have a great deal to do with his own natural modesty, which communicates itself. On foreign policy, it's almost Pollyanna, however. He speaks of the Middle East peace process as if it was an actual reality, rather than the phony joke which it's becoming. He has a view of the world that all problems can eventually be solved. He looks back on the Cold War with the same nostalgia that I have for it, partly because it was his occupation, but he doesn't really seem to grasp what shape the world is in afterwards.
What does it say when you pick up the newspaper? As a matter of fact, we have Kevin Landrigan on the line from the Nashville Telegraph. We'll ask him in just a second the question. But what does it say when you read the polls that in New Hampshire, Bob Dole roughly 35% among the GOP and Colin Powell 17%?
Doesn't say anything. I mean,
why do we do that then?
Why do we do the Iowa caucuses? Why is everything in the primary process designed to maximize stupidity? Why? It's a very good question. Why do people cover it like Groundhog Day?
Why are we talking
Roll on the California primary. I refuse. I'm going on strike. I'm not going up there again.
Kevin Landrigan.
Saw Pat Buchanan up there last time. Had a great time. That's plenty. It's, you know, it's enough for a lifetime.
Of the Nashville Telegraph State House political reporter, what was last night like?
It was like the week before the primary instead of the year before, Brian. It was really a frenetic, exciting event with so much electricity in the air. I think even the party leaders never expected such momentum for an event this early. But I think with the long holiday weekend, with a lot of international media looking for an opportunity to come to New Hampshire, they jumped on it and the candidates responded.
Why do you think people are excited when there's 21 months to go before the election?
Well, I do think in the Republican Party there's a great feeling of optimism that they feel they smell blood in the water, if you will. They think Bill Clinton is in trouble politically, and the earlier and more often they seize on that advantage, the higher his negative numbers go, and the more electable the Republican nominee becomes.
There were 9 people that spoke last night, and that's not counting P.J. O'Rourke, who spoke at the end. Who got the most reaction of any kind?
Well, actually, it's an interesting question, Brian, because the answer is not, certainly wasn't predictable for me. I thought Pat Buchanan, who was the last speaker, actually got one of the strongest ovations. I think it was testimony to the fact that he put an impressive very conservative coalition together in '92, and it was almost a thank you for going out there and running against a president who many in that room last night had fond memories for, but obviously feel made mistakes. It was a good night for talk show hosts. Alan Keyes, who preceded him, actually got a strong applause as well.
Let me ask you about a man who started as a talk show host, and his picture made it to the Philadelphia Inquirer this morning. His name is Congressman Bob Dornan, and you can see that on your screen right there. He's talking to a woman at the dinner. What was the reaction to him?
He again threw a lot of good red meat rhetoric out there, and comments such as referring to the members of the Senate who preceded him as the House of Lords, and he representing the House of the People. I thought he had a good night as well. I thought what was very
Everybody seems to have had a perfectly splendid time.
I thought what was very interesting, Brian, was your guest yesterday morning. Joe McQuaid was managing editor of the Union Leader, was sitting at Bob Dornan's table, which some of the Buchanan people noticed. If you recall, the Union Leader was prominently supporting Pat Buchanan in '92 against George Bush, and that raised a lot of eyebrows.
Kevin Landrigan, thanks for this report, and we look forward to talking more with you as the next 21 months continues.
Great. Thank you, Brian.
Morning. Your reaction, sir?
Well, I mean, well, we spared anything, blood in the water, red meat rhetoric, you know. It conforms to every definition I know of a media event. It's mainly media people there. The presence of Patrick O'Rourke tells you all you really need to know.
But why does
Because it's a media event, it will get coverage in the media. Thus, they will assume that because it's on the front page, everybody's reading it. They are wrong about that.
Everybody's not reading it.
Completely wrong about that.
I mean, by the way, here's a piece from your publication again.
Wacko right-wing state where, as he says, the one with a tiny population, only one newspaper, the Manchester Union Leader, which is really not a newspaper at all, it's a propaganda sheet. No wonder sort of raging dingbats like Dornan can appear, you know, presidential for a night. But it's all going to be abolished by moving the California primary up, and I can't wait.
How interested are your readers in Bill Clinton and Al Gore? And when did you do this piece right here?
Hang on, that one I suppose to be a couple of months ago. They're interested insofar as it gets above the parapet when he's in serious trouble. They'll certainly be interested in who is the next president. My job is to make them interested a lot of the time, to catch their attention. I can't assume in a paper like mine that my readers are going to be interested naturally, and so I have to look for things which will be understandable to a British audience. But whether they'll be interested in New Hampshire at this time, I frankly doubt. I must say I thought a lot of the light went out of the contest when Gingrich said that he would not be running.
You think he's out for good?
I think he made it pretty clear that and it would be very difficult for him to back out of that now. And it will also be rather late for him to start raising the money. And I think he had been seriously considering it, and I think he felt he needed to make his mind up. And he would have been a far more interesting candidate than any of the ones now running.
That's a fact.
On this President's Day, our interview that was recorded Friday with Bill Clinton will run at 8 o'clock East Coast time for the first time. Let's look at just a little tiny bit of the setup and a question about books, and we'll come back and get our guest reaction and go to the phones.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, Mr. President. How are you?
Sorry I'm late, but I was
This interview starts right after the hookup and lasted about 30 minutes. Let's listen in when the fellow there is Eric Hansen from our staff, miking the president, as we call it. And what you can't see is behind that camera about 20 people standing around watching this interview unfold in the Oval Office. Actually, they're not there. No, we had about 6 or 7 of our folks, and then some Secret Service and some people from the Signal Corps and from the White House Communications Agency. And then what we really want to show you here is this thing about the books, and here we go. Do you read the presidents now, since you've been in the White House, their words?
Yes, I just read, interestingly enough, I just read the Benjamin Thomas's biography of Lincoln, which was written in the 50s, I think. And it's a biography I had never read. And you see over there on my desk, I've got a new biography of Jefferson, the Randall biography of Jefferson I'm about to get into. And I just read Doris Kearns Goodwin's magnificent biography of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt in during the war, No Ordinary Time. It's a terrific book. So I read quite a bit about it. I read August Hexer's biography of Woodrow Wilson last year, something which I should have read before, I guess, but I'd never gotten around to reading.
As you're reading, do you delve in and see yourself in any of those?
You can't help imagining, you know, how you would have done in their time, how they would do in your time. What strengths did they have that you could perhaps develop? What errors did they make that you could perhaps avoid? How different is it?
Yeah, Jimmy Carter in our book notes last night endorsed or said he'd read this book. The president said he read this book. Have you?
I read the large chunk of it that was in the New Yorker.
What is there that we need to learn from FDR's time?
Ooh, well, I think I have to free associate. But the first thing that comes into my mind is, I think, something to do probably with optimism. You've heard it before. But there was a feeling, quite justifiably too, after all, the United States was doing incredibly well under Roosevelt. I mean, it was about to become, at a very low price, the most powerful country in the history of the world.
Peter Hitchens, the other book that he mentioned is this one that you can find in a lot of bookstores. It's the Benjamin Thomas biography of Abraham Lincoln. This portrait by G.P. Healy is hanging in the portrait gallery where we were with our cameras earlier on the Frederick Douglass exhibit. Does Abraham Lincoln mean anything to British folks?
Oh, a great deal. And you'll remember that British cotton workers not happily but willingly suffered a great deal during the Civil War because of their enormous support for the emancipation of slaves. And Lincoln is remembered and will always be remembered as, I think, the greatest American president as far as British people are concerned.
One of Karl Marx's finest moments was to help organize the movement in support from England in support of the Union and of the abolition.
It was British.
Because, of course, the British ruling class was completely militarily and economically on the side of the South and tried as best it could to strangle Mr. Lincoln's government. So it was a very, very hot issue in Britain, and some of the positions taken up then can be found replicated today, too. Gore Vidal's novel, by the way, I think, in his Washington cycle of novels, his Lincoln is a really wonderful historical portrait, as well as a very good novel.
But I was also going to point out, you've got Frederick Douglass's picture, that it was British people who bought Douglass's freedom. And it was a very powerful issue in Britain, and one which is still, I think, remembered.
Peter Hitchens is the Washington correspondent for the London Daily Express, is originally from Portsmouth, England, as is his brother, Christopher, who is a columnist with Vanity Fair and The Nation. And we go to the phones. North Canton, Ohio, for our first call. Go ahead, please. Hello.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
We sure can.
Okay, thank you for C-SPAN. I just wanted to make a comment about liars. That's what my problem is with this country. You know, when they had Foster come forward for his nomination, we all know abortion is legal. I could have even accepted that being pro-life. But the fact that he lied about it, and then it makes you wonder, what else is he lying about? And why is he being so disingenuous about something that is legal? Why did he care?
Are there liars on both sides of the political fence?
Sure. Oh, sure. You know, and you hear it all the time. And I'm raising a grandson right now, and that's the big thing in our house, is don't lie to me. Tell me the truth, and then we'll deal with it from there.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, there's a very conspicuous example in the newspaper this morning, I think. I was wondering when William Safire was going to say anything about this, but he has returned to one of his and one of my favorite subjects, which is the now bipartisan conspiracy to bury the evidence on what was commonly called Iraqgate. It's on the op-ed page.
But it is, in fairness, it is complicated to understand the whole column, isn't it, this morning?
It is complicated, and it helps to have a bit of background, but the essentials of it are fairly simple. There is the Clinton Justice Department, the Janet Reno Justice Department, has inherited the whole of the Bush administration's cover-up of the fact that American policy in the Middle East was designed both to arm and keep in the war Iran and Iraq, and have a divide-and-rule policy, as a result of which America got itself into a war.
Peter Hitchens, you were going to comment?
With terrible domestic repercussions.
On liars?
Only on Henry Foster. I think that Dr. Foster probably really isn't the man to blame here, though he shared with Bill Clinton and apparently Al Gore the belief that it simply didn't matter that he'd been conducting abortions and sterilizations. That remains to me the problem, that whether you are pro-abortion, I refuse to use this term pro-choice, or whether you're anti-abortion, if you care about it, then it's important that a doctor has conducted them. And it was quite plain that neither Dr. Foster nor President Clinton nor Al Gore, who played some part in this choice, thought that it mattered.
San Diego, thank you for waiting.
Thank you, Brian. It's been many a year since I have been able to get through. They cut the rings off.
I know. Welcome, though. We're glad to have you back.
Thank you. I want to say this, that Governor Mario Cuomo is the most intelligent white man in the world. and will make the greatest and most intelligent president that America has ever had. This is no exaggeration. This is a fact. And I think that's why these people who talk about presidents dance all around him. They know that he is the most intelligent of all.
Thanks.
Well, he obviously doesn't think so, or he would have run for president by now.
Yes, I don't think he even thinks he's the most intelligent white man in the world. I don't think he even thinks he's the most intelligent Italian-American in the world.
Panama City, Florida.
Yes, good morning. How are you this morning? Thank God for C-SPAN. A comment and a question. The comment is that just makes you sickening to see somebody like Clinton standing in front of the Iwo Jima Memorial. I don't know what the British reaction is, but the veterans of the United States of America take a big offense to it. My question's for Peter. Who does he think the next president of the United States is going to be? And I'll hang up and listen for his comment. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Who do you think will be the next president of the United States?
I think it's beginning to look as if it will be Bob Dole simply by default. Because
The next president, he's going to beat Bill Clinton.
I think practically anybody will be able to beat Bill Clinton if Bill Clinton runs by November 1996. And I think that the forces are lining up behind Bob Dole. It may be a Dole-Gore contest.
Do you agree with that?
Just a word on the gentleman's first point, by the way. I mean, I'm not a fan of Clinton at all, as you know. And I never have been, but what would these people who always claim to speak for all veterans, you notice when they call, what would they say if there was a commemoration of the Iwo Jima landings and the president did not go? It seems to me what they're demanding is something impossible of him. You're going to ridicule him for going if he goes, and you can only picture what they would say if he'd stayed away. So it's silly, really, and in fact, it's the only good thing Clinton ever did in his life was to oppose the war of aggression against Vietnam. And he now is trying, so the reason I've always disliked him is he can't. And the origin, really, of his lying is he can't wait to live that good bit of his life down and apologize for it and pretend it never happened.
Smoky Point, Washington.
Yes, thanks, Brian, for taking my phone call.
Welcome.
I got a question for each of the boys about Tom Daschle, but first I want to preface these questions by saying I really think that one of the duties of the President of the United States is to bring the country together. I don't think his appointment of Mr. Foster did that. I think he could have done a much better job in picking it. Anyway, Peter, in reference to Tom Daschle, do you think the wives of the 4 pilots that died, due to his strong-arming his way into that thing over the airlines, do you think those wives will ever see justice?
Well, I think they probably will now, because he's his party's leader in the Senate, and it's so embarrassing for him to have to face all these questions about this rather peculiar airline, that justice is now on the way to them. Had he not become Democratic leader, then I think they might have had to wait rather a long time.
Question for Christopher Hitchens.
Chris, how do you feel about Tom Daschle campaigning in '86 a balanced budget amendment? That's what he was going to do, and now he's just turning tail because he's not in the majority.
I've got to get up to speed on this Daschle guy. I sat next at dinner not long ago to someone who worked for him, who seemed quite nice, but he's one of those people who seems to have come from nowhere to me.
Some of our audience is upset, and you'll see here on the screen, there's a I love you but fax here, and it's I was saddened, no made ill by witnessing the fiasco of Barbara Streisand as an expert at the Kennedy Center, Kennedy School of Government. Well, if this is now the future of C-SPAN, just a few suggestions, and then one Clint Eastwood to comment on the subway shooting case from the Dirty Harry angle. We'd be glad to cover that. Jane Fonda to cover the emergence of capitalism, the state of trade negotiations in China. Sonny Bono to cover Congress on a regular basis with Gopher from the Love Boat as a substitute. Also during the congressional votes, Corbin Burnson could provide the latest O.J. trial. I don't even know what that means. I'm sure you do.
No. Just because I know about Brad Pitt doesn't mean I know everything.
The new C-SPAN, the former C-SPAN admirer Wayne Switz of Nashville, Tennessee. Should you be that upset with us covering Barbara Streisand at the Kennedy School of Government?
What I want to know is, what is it about actors and actresses that makes them think that they can tell us all what to do? I'm always amazed by it, because somebody writes nice words for them to say. They think eventually that they're all Shakespeare themselves. and it takes over. And I suppose it's worth covering because it's so astonishing to watch.
It's the duty of any citizen in a free society to keep his or her mouth open. This is the facts we've got here from Pat Winter. It is, let's see, why are men like Fred Barnes on last week's Sunday Journal so distressed at Streisand for being a vocal citizen? In the past, singers such as King David of Israel and later the bards of Celtic Britain were literally the speakers of the people who confronted the king's court on behalf of the people's welfare.
I didn't think King David was a singer who happened to become king.
Here might be, no, it's
interesting.
It's one way of putting it. Someone else has been trying and failing with the Psalms, like the president. Here might be the point to say that my magazine, The Nation, America's oldest and most serious political weekly, has just been lucky enough to acquire Paul Newman as one of its publishers and backers. And I think the fact is, and I would have said this before, we were lucky enough to have this supporter, that everyone would say of Paul Newman that he was a serious guy on or off the screen, that he was known to take a real intelligent interest in public affairs, to go to the boring meetings as well as the sort of sexy and exciting ones, to be well-read and modest and a good guy. That's why we wanted him and he wanted us. So there's nothing, Peter talks as if there was some character defect in being an actor, and I don't think that that's true. It doesn't mean you have to become superficial and narcissistic, though let's say that we have given that proposition an 8-year try in the presidency with someone who was, you know, a vacant script and an empty suit.
Christopher Hitchens and his brother Peter Hitchens, one on the left, one on the right. Bend, Oregon. Go ahead, please.
Brian, I love you, no ifs, ands, or buts.
Thank you.
I am a Brit twit, and I would like to direct my question to Christopher. Christopher, your mother certainly didn't bring up fools, but I bet she taught you how to fix your tie properly. I have absolutely no agreement with you on anything, but I do admire your honesty, and I would like, you're funny too, I would like to ask you what your assessment of the press here in America is versus those in Europe, and specifically in Britain. Keep up the good work. You do good stuff.
Bless you. What a wonderful voice she's got. Because it's very early in Oregon. Perhaps she isn't like that in the afternoons. Perhaps she isn't that husky in the afternoons. Who knows? My own voice is dropping an octave in sympathy. Well, the press here, the great thing about it, especially if you're a magazine writer, as I am principally, is that there's much more of it. I mean, there's just enormous amount more variety and, what's the word, opportunity to write. And it's better paid. If you mean the newspaper press, the great difference in Britain is the papers like the one Peter works for, which openly say, you know, basically this paper supports the Conservative Party and its interests and so forth. Almost all the papers are very heavily partisan and heavily conglomerated as to their ownership. Whereas here, though the ownership and conglomeration is very great, there is this feeling that you must pretend to be objective all the time, so, which can lead to tedium. Because it's an obvious strain on a lot of people pretending that they're strictly impartial, even-handed, and so forth, when they are not. So there's an absence of hypocrisy in Fleet Street, and I'm glad that, you know, I worked there for a bit and I learned a lot from it.
Peter Hitchens, back to this Richard Rodriguez column that's running in several newspapers around the country. We talked about earlier, and the headline is Brit Twit. Yes. They have this he has this paragraph about Tina Brown, who runs the New Yorker magazine. It says, Tina Brown is perhaps the most famous of the Pilgrims. She left London some years ago after editing a society mag called The Tatler. Ms. Brown was paid to bring her shallow sensibility to bear on Vanity Fair in the 1980s. Vanity Fair has made a specialty of in-depth interviews with personalities of no depth. It became a huge success, reckoned in pages of advertisements. Do you know Tina Brown?
I don't know Tina Brown. No, I think it's very unfair to Vanity Fair, though.
Your brother worked for her.
Well, I know, but it's not just that. I think there's a lot more than that in Vanity Fair.
British tabloids are notorious for an obsession with provincial celebrity. The Dipso Duke, the tycoon caught whoopsie in his high heels. Americans always thought the genre had something to do with working class resentment of the upper class.
I don't think so. It's just all part of the national entertainment. We live, whether we like it or not, in a sort of soap opera in which we enjoy seeing the characters make fools of themselves, and it's fun to read about. And to pretend that it's not, I think, is to be snobbish and silly.
I should say, yes, in case I seem too lugubrious about this, that this is the first time I've ever been compared to a character from an Evelyn Waugh novel. I mean, I don't know if Mr. Rodriguez knows this, but this is not the insult that he might think. I mean, Evelyn Waugh drew characters of great wit and brittleness and bearing and style, as well as, of course, snobbery, creepiness, other sins of that kind. It's a misfire, really, and it's certainly, Tina Brown doesn't need me to defend her, but the fact is a lot more people read the New Yorker and get a great deal more out of it than they did before she was editor.
One of the people we're visiting with this morning is Park Ranger Bill Clark, who is in charge of the Frederick Douglass House over in Anacostia, southeast here in Washington. He's on our screen right there. Bill Clark, where are you?
Well, I am here in the East Parlor, Brian, and here was the one place where most of Mr. Douglass's guests would be invited to come and wait for him to come out of the library where he spent some 5 hours a day. Now, in this East Parlor, as you look behind me here, is the single portrait of Mr. Douglass, the one where it was done by Sarah Jane Eddy back in 1883, and it's the only portrait in existence where he actually posed for alone.
Posed for alone?
Yes, sir.
What do you mean?
Well, he had one other portrait done of himself with his second wife, Helen Pitts Douglass, but this is the only one in existence where he was simply sitting there, as you can see in a three-quarter view, by himself. We have many other portraits done of Mr. Douglass, but this one he actually sat for.
You say he spent 5 hours a day in the library doing what?
Well, sir, he spent time studying. Studying law, studying religion. He loved Shakespeare. But, Brian, you know, as a slave, he was not allowed to go to school nor carry a book or a pen. Mr. Douglass, by the time he moved here to Cedar Hill, actually spoke 7 languages. And that came from studying.
When you prepared to talk about him for your job there, how did you study about Frederick Douglass?
Reading, writing, listening. We have many historians throughout the country. Many people, such as up at Westchester University up in Pennsylvania, many people here at Howard University, many people throughout the country who are very knowledgeable about the life and times of Frederick Douglass. The staff here, quite knowledgeable. You simply have to sit down, read a lot, listen a lot, and simply dive right into all of Mr. Douglass's complexities, because he lived to be 77 years old, and as you know, quite a complex life.
How many people work there at the home with you?
Well, we have about 10 staffers here. We have maintenance people here. We have a great interpretive staff here. We have a museum curator here. And we have an entire national park system that maintains this home in its entirety.
What's it cost a year to maintain that home?
Well, it depends on where you put your dollars and cents at. Brian, we have a very small operating budget, mostly for the staff here, who aren't, I can't say aren't well paid, but they're greatly paid to appreciate what they're doing for Mr. Douglass. Our budget fluctuates from one year to the next, but it's averaging several $100,000.
All right, now we're looking around the room there, and there's a bust over there on a statue way over there against the wall. What is that?
That's Wendell Phillips, sir. He is one of those great abolitionist leaders who Mr. Douglass truly respected.
Now, did he have that statue in the living room when he was alive?
Yes, sir.
Douglass?
Yes, sir. In fact, if you come here, you will see everything as it was when Mr. Douglass lived here. This home has been restored to completely the way it looked between 1877 and 1895. His second wife, Helen Pitts Douglass, wanted this site to be maintained as a memorial, as the legacy, as a complete site where everyone could see how he lived, how he was, and in his entirety. It's just that complete.
Christopher Hitchens at our table here this morning has a question for you.
Sure.
Yeah, I've been to the house. It's wonderful, by the way.
Yes, sir.
And I recommend everyone goes. And I also was once briefly a volunteer in the literacy program in Washington, D.C., where adult literacy is terrifyingly high, as you know.
Ah.
And I can't think that Douglass wouldn't make an almost perfect role model, not a phrase I particularly like, but I mean, I hope that what you were saying about the importance of learning and literacy sort of gets
yes, sir.
taken up a bit more. But my question was this, because Peter, my brother, had stolen my best point, which is that indeed Frederick Douglass's life and liberty were ransomed by a British abolitionist committee.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it also true that he spent some time as Consul General in Haiti?
That's correct,
Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, as the Consul General, actually he was considered the Minister and General Counsel of Haiti. And what he did there was he communicated with President Hippolyte. His idea was he wanted to try and establish a port, the right for the American naval complex to set up a port in Mole. And he was trying to carry the message of our president to the president of Hippolyte, and he kept trying to get him to agree to our ships docking there. Now, of course, he came with a naval armada with him, and it looked kind of how can I say it? It looked rather like he was trying to demand that our country be allowed to do this. And of course, he did the best he could to make President Hippolyte understand that he only was trying to get an agreement as opposed to demanding an agreement. But after 2 years of being there in Haiti, Mr. Douglass had to give up. He was being totally demeaned by our American press here. They said because Mr. Douglass was an African-American man, he agreed too much with the darker complexioned people of Haiti, and he was not doing as his president ordered him to do. So Mr. Douglass threw up his hands and said, I will come back to my country. I will work harder for my people directly. I do not have to take this insult.
Bill Clark, he was a Republican. How would that go down today?
Well, sir, of course, you know, each party changes. Each party changes one way or another throughout the years. They tend to change almost with administrations because you might say 1 year the Democrats are one way, 1 year the Republicans are another way. Well, Mr. Douglass was a devout Republican. At the time, the Republicans were the main party that was trying to be the abolitionist party. There were many others, of course, but at the time, the Democratic Party was, for the most part, trying to keep slavery alive in the South.
Bill Clark, you're in the living room. What else in there do people like to see when they come to the Frederick Douglass home?
The library. They love seeing the library and understanding that Mr. Douglass had some 10,000 books or more during his lifetime. In our library here, though, we have 1,030 books that belong to Mr. Douglass. And they love seeing the books. They love seeing his beautiful desk, where you can actually see his glasses and all the other artifacts and furnishings that belong to Mr. Douglass.
Well, with the help of Luis Munoz, who's behind that camera, and you, Bill Clark, we'll come back to you in a few minutes to learn more about the Frederick Douglass home.
Fantastic. Thank you.
By the way, we didn't go through all the papers earlier this morning. Anything else that you were reading that you don't have to have the paper in front of you that got your attention?
There's an extraordinarily alarming story in the New York Times about the new Egyptian attitude towards Israel. The trouble that they're making over Israel's nuclear weapons, I think, is a sign of much greater trouble to come in that relationship. And even $2 billion a year of American aid may not be able to keep Egypt believing in the fantasy of Middle East peace much longer. And when that keystone of the whole construction falls out, who knows what's going to happen. I can't believe the efforts that are being made by the U.S. administration at the moment to cobble together a peace that won't last in that area of the world.
You refer in your piece in The Nation to your friend Salman Rushdie, and I know that Richard Rodriguez writes about your friend Salman Rushdie and your relationship. How friendly are you with Mr. Rushdie?
Well, I don't want to claim to scrape any more acquaintance than is due to me, but I've known him for a little while. I've known him since before he was placed under a life and a death sentence by the dying Khomeini, for example, and I've kept up with him.
Where is he now?
He stayed in my house. I don't know. I mean, I know he's in England, but I don't have a need to know about where he sleeps. Nobody does, in fact. That's been going on 6 years, last Valentine's Day, last 14th of Feb. That's the... I think about him every day, but I think about him particularly then.
Speaking of President's Day, one of our 41 men who have been president in this country, James Buchanan, is buried at Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He has a home up there where you can go through the museum called Wheatland. And we have on the line a caller from Lancaster. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Brian.
Hi.
Concerning Republican Representative Bob Dornan, about 1 year ago, Dornan was substituting for Rush Limbaugh on Limbaugh's radio program. On that day, Dornan was busy spreading the rumor over national radio that Vince Foster was murdered in an apartment in Washington, D.C., owned by Hillary Clinton, and that Foster's body was moved to a park in Virginia. Also, during the 1992 presidential campaign, during special orders on the House floor, Dornan was spreading rumors that Bill Clinton had been meeting with the KGB in Moscow during his trip to Russia as a Rhodes Scholar. Right-wingers make these McCarthyistic accusations all the time, and they never provide proof. When they don't provide proof of these accusations, it's the same as lying. I think Mr. Dornan is the lowest form of political life. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks for the call.
Well, he's sort of crazy politically. He's only a step or so short of kind of Orange County John Birchall, I would say. This is the guy who splashed his way across Chappaquiddick, isn't it, to try and prove something about Senator Kennedy. And he went and reenacted the whole thing. Yeah. He's a really, but I mean, he's great fun, I find him. mean, because I don't think anybody takes him seriously. I can't think of him as a menace, really, at all. He's sort of part of the public stock of harmless pleasure.
Have you seen this story, by the way, off the subject about John Major's son?
Yeah.
Yes, and which follows the story about John Major himself 2 weeks ago.
Which was?
That he turned out to have been living with an older woman for some years before his current marriage began. It made him seem much more exciting to a lot of people than he previously was. Now his son is alleged to have been having dalliance with an older woman as well. Everyone is vigorously denying it, of course. And so since we don't have the First Amendment in Britain, I can say no more.
It made it to our paper here, this story.
Yeah, the guy has a famous name. Jordache. It's some kind of haberdasher.
Michael Jordache.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether that's
the husband of Elaine Jordache, who's 32. That this young man, his name's James Major's 19, allegedly had an affair with, I guess.
The problem with it is, I suppose, and the reason why everyone will have such a good time is that, you know, Major is another of these family values people. He goes on and on and on about back to basics and the family and the rest of it, and he, you know, his son appears to be a homewrecker, and he seems to have more families than he knows what to do with himself.
Nice, California, thanks for waiting. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
How you doing?
I'd like to say a little bit about C-SPAN. Of course, I watch it a great deal. Since I retired, it's the only thing on daytime television that isn't just the toxic dump. And the only complaint I have is that you have too many of the same people on. It seems to me like so often I turn on and there's that awful Fred Barnes. And he, you know, I see him on McLaughlin's, and I've quit watching that because I can't stand the yelling and the posturing on it. But I wish you'd make an effort to reach out and get more print journalists that we don't see too much of. And I do enjoy the Hitchens, both of them.
Thank you.
I am a far left-wing liberal Democrat, and I don't agree with either one of them. But I do. They're so refreshing. You know, we hear so much of the same kind of mindset among our journalists, and I love having the English come over. It's not, maybe they're not actually better educated than we are, but they sound like it. And it's just refreshing to hear this other viewpoint.
Thanks for the idea, the suggestion. We struggle with this. I mean, it's a complaint we get a lot, that there are too many people right in the middle.
Yeah, I know what she means about the rest of daytime TV as well.
What do you think of the idea of John F. Kennedy, Jr.? It's a picture of him right here in the New York Times this morning, starting a magazine called George about politics.
I can't believe that the Kennedys still have the nerve to stay in politics after everything that we now know about all of them. I really do wish they'd go away. The magic, such as it may have been, has dissolved so completely that I am baffled by the continuing fascination with them. Who are these people? What have they done? Is there any single thing you can mark out to the credit of one of them?
Let me read.
And if JFK hadn't been assassinated, would we care?
Let me read what John F. Kennedy Jr. says. We are defining politics very broadly and want to focus on entertainment and politics, media and politics, business and politics, he said. Ultimately, this magazine has to be useful and give people information about public issues in the same way that some magazines have to people who don't want that much sophisticated information. We would like to make information about public issues accessible in a way that makes people feel included.
Listen to it. Pure blather, right, from beginning to end. Absolutely.
You don't like
opens the mouth before the brain has been engaged. Thinks if you rub in certain keywords, you know, everything will be all right. No demand for that kind of thing at all. And, you know, all this stuff that people used to talk about, the Camelot factor, Kennedy's as royalty and so forth, is actually coming out to be true in one respect. Same as the British royal family. There are too many of them. Too many young sprigs around the place. And that's always the sign of degeneration in a dynasty. And I'm sure it'll prove out to be so in this case. I never remember which one this one is.
How long have you been in the country now, Peter Hitchens?
18 months.
You have your family with you?
Yes.
How many children?
2.
How old are they?
11 and 6.
What do they think of all this?
What do they think of all what? This?
Living here,
living here.
Doing what you're doing and all that?
My daughter enjoys it more than I do. I think...
What's her name?
Her name is Rebecca.
And why does she enjoy it more than you?
I just think she finds the country almost designed for her, and I think it's a country that you appreciate more if you encounter it young. I am a spectator here. I can never be a participant. She can be a participant.
She's 11.
Yeah.
And how about you, Mr. Hitchens? How long have you been in this country?
13, 14 years now. I mean, I'm an immigrant. I've moved here. I'm not stationed here by anyone. Haven't gone that far, no.
Going to?
I'm a green card holder, as they say, a legal alien. I quite like being a legal alien.
Married?
I have 3 American children, though. 3 American citizens.
Age?
In my family. 10 and a half, 5 and a half, and year and a half.
What do they think of all this?
Little Laura Antonia is still rather feeling her way. But Alexander is an all-American, he really is. I mean...
Alexander's been here.
Alexander came on once, and maybe, if you remember, gave his endorsements. Yeah.
Brandon, Florida, you're next.
Yes, Brian.
Hi.
Good morning.
Hi.
Brian, the caller before had called you about he was all upset, the liberal. Well, listen, I was a liberal for many years until the last 3 years, and I really found out I was brung up and lived in Arkansas. And, you know, the real facts hadn't really come out. I don't know why people are just scared the way this guy operates, and I'm going to tell you, he's dangerous, and that's the president. And what really angers me so much, the farmers down here in Brown was the lobbyist. All this farm ground here in Arkansas has been taken off by foreign countries, and the people that lives on it, that farms it, are just like setting goats. And he's the one that helped lobby this out and sell our farm ground out.
Thanks. You ever been to Arkansas?
Yeah, I have. I went down during the campaign. Loved it, actually. Went to Little Rock. Went to Hot Springs, which is where Bill Clinton is really from. All this nonsense about how he's from a small town called Hope is for the birds. He's from a sort of really wide-open, rather gamey town called Hot Springs, and I went into the Delta a bit. I adored it. I didn't get all that stuff about the farmland, but was he making a reference to Ron Brown in there, do you think? Difficult to say. Or Floyd Brown?
Perhaps. I remember taking a trip to the Ozarks to go and view the Whitewater estate, and on the way there is a road sign which says very crooked and steep, which someone had shot several holes through. It seemed to sum up.
Did you take a picture of it to put in your newspaper?
I'm sorry, I'd run out of film.
John Stanley Phillips Jr. has this America Online. I see a distinct ho-hum feeling regarding Dole. Who was the last president elected by default? Talk about blood in the water. Clintonista is what it's signed.
Yeah, I feel a bit ho-hum, don't you? I mean, he's never particularly stood for anything. And if we're supposed to be living in this Gingrichian, revolutionary, libertarian, third wave revolution, all that stuff, it seems bizarre to me to have someone who's basically just been a party man all his life.
What do you think of Newt Gingrich?
Well, I think Gingrich is interesting as a person.
What do you
I've
think
had debates with him in the past. And I'm currently reading his doctoral thesis.
Really?
Yeah, I've got his 1971 dissertation.
On?
Education policy in the Belgian Congo. See, when I study a guy, I really study him.
Where'd you find his dissertation?
Oh, anyone can get that if they want to. I mean, it just takes. I mean, they're all on the record.
Were there a lot
it took a while, actually.
Were there a lot of stamps on it from the library that said checked out by hundreds of people?
I may be the first. Actually, I've got a rather virginal-looking copy.
Peter Hitch.
He is not a stupid guy at all, nor a nasty one. He doesn't give me the feeling that I had when I was in Washington when Reagan's people came in. I mean, really sort of ghastly people like Meese and North and Casey and Haig. I mean, it was quite scary to be in Washington at that period. I don't get the feeling with Gingrich's people of a sort of whiff of Weimar that one had there. And so we'll see, but I'm always on my guard.
Most interesting American politician since FDR and possibly since Teddy Roosevelt, and one who actually has that amazingly lacking thing in modern times, a sense of history, and some conception of what he might achieve, and also, almost uniquely among modern Western politicians, an idea of what the enemy is, what the problem is, and the extent of the disaster that's facing Western civilization if we don't sort out the problems that are threatening it.
He may have done a very smart thing last week, which was not to fight too hard to save his Star Wars proposal. Because if the Democrats don't seem to realize it yet, but by saving the Republicans from having to go ahead with that crackpot scheme, they may have helped solve their budgetary problem.
By the way, I'm trying to find it here. The New York.
A12. It's on.
Yeah, you know what I'm looking for. in A12 this morning, there's a huge piece, and this is also CNN did a piece I noticed this morning. Bob Franken was down there at Reinhardt College, and here's Peter Applebaum has a whole piece on the course at Reinhardt College, and there's the students, and he was down there teaching over the weekend. Thanks, Oroville, California, for waiting. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for C-SPAN.
Welcome.
I'd just like to recommend a couple of things, and that would be to put some of the issues and concerns of the left that are published in magazines like Z, Utner Reader, maybe even Covert Action Information Bulletin. They seem to be covering a spectrum that is not found on C-SPAN that would greatly add to the mix.
That's a great idea. I see the Utne Reader all the time, and we don't have anybody on here from there, but...
Don't you get Z? You should.
No, but it's good.
Z is good. CAIB is good, too.
Good suggestions.
I would like to ask Christopher Hitchens if he can tell me what he thinks of the advent in Central and South America and since the passage of GATT and NAFTA, and what do you think that portends for American relations, North American relations with Central and South America?
By the way, before we lose you, where is Oroville?
Oroville's about 80 miles north of Sacramento.
In the hills?
It's from the foothills, about 1,000 feet up, rural country. It's next to a college town called Chico, which has some infamy and be one of the party capitals, college capitals of the United States.
If you don't mind me asking, what do you do for a living?
Well, I'm a local bureaucrat. I work for the county government, and I go after people who don't pay their child support.
And do you watch us on cable or satellite? Or
cable.
Great. Thanks for the call, Mr. Hitchens.
Well, I really ought to apologize because, apart from that, I'm losing my voice, for the fact that I'm halfway through trying to make up my mind about Mexico and to try to find out enough to know to say something smart. I have nothing smart to say yet. So as the proverbs say, whereof one knows little, one should be slow to speak.
Bill G. Nikoloff says, I agree with the brothers Hitchens on the hard left that Clinton has always been as phony as a $3 bill. Why does he think that the media establishment in this country went to bat for Clinton in such a wholehearted way?
Well, he was one of them. He was the same age. That's not it. He was the same education, the same aspirations, the same belief that's infected people in the 1960s that they were the cleverest, the best, the most infused with goodness in the history of the world. They felt comfortable with him. It's one of the reasons for the almost horrendous vituperation directed against poor Dan Quayle, who's no genius but never deserved what he got. He was of their generation and he didn't agree with them, and that's why they gave it to him so much and why they continue to do so.
No, that's all cock and bull.
Well, I'm glad we're disagreeing about that.
Because, I mean, after all, I am one of those 60s types, and I can't stand Clinton, and most of the people I knew couldn't stand him either. And none of my friends at The Nation, for example, we were one of the first papers to start saying what a crook and a creep he was. The reason why he got a lock on the media, as well as on the campaign money, so early on, was because he ran as a new Democrat. He ran as one of those who said the only real problem with the Democratic Party was it wasn't sufficiently conservative. And that's the diagnosis with which the mainstream and consensus press agreed. And he talked a lot of technobabble and all that sort of stuff. And he it's really funny to remember this now, but he represented himself as the electable one. So by the time we were out of New Hampshire, the press had all agreed, we have a candidate now. Why do we need to have an election? It's all locked up. It was a deplorable business. It was very hard to puncture that.
But you're stuck.
What I'd like to know is why the right wing kept so quiet about what they knew about some of Clinton's dealings in Arkansas until after the election. I have a theory on why that might be true, but I don't want to sound paranoid about it.
You're stuck. You come from that part of the 60s and 70s, which I remember as well, when being left-wing was actually quite difficult on occasion and could damage your career, your prospects, and your future. The second wave, the wave to which Clinton belongs and to which most professional people of my generation belonged, came after the victory of almost all the liberal ideas in the late 60s, since when it's been easy, since when you never meet anybody who disagrees with you, since when the establishment has become sympathetic to those causes, you sacrifice nothing from it. Clinton's one of those. You're still living in the time when it was tough.
But I mean, Clinton had left all that behind a long time before he became governor of Arkansas, for example. I mean, when he was governor of Arkansas, he sent the National Guard down to Central America to help out the Contras. He conducted executions of poor and minority people on time that was scheduled by his re-election and his primary needs. He ran a right-to-work state which didn't have a civil rights statute. He was completely silent about all the years of Reagan and Bush. He just surfaced perfectly neatly as a guy to the national security people, the big political donors, and the consensus press could say, this guy is one of us. Now, that is true, but that's the one of them that he was.
Gainesville, Florida. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I hear a lot of comments like this, and my feeling is that for Phil Graham, who got an academic deferment, and his ilk to constantly impugn President Clinton's patriotism is pretty high on the hypocrisy scale. I just can't, there's no a limit to the amount of hypocrisy one can hear. But what makes it even worse with these people is that the biggest complainers about Bill Clinton were the hawks. If they were such hawks, why in the hell didn't they sign up and go over there immediately? Instead, they've got all these excuses about how they were needed more at home. Phil Graham says it would be better for him to stay at Texas A&M and teach and get those kids to go to Vietnam than for him to go himself. And finally, one more thing. Christopher Hitchens, why don't you do a story on the various politicians who did this, who pulled this trick, and then now impugn President Clinton over it?
There's simply no comparison. If you read David Marines's fascinating new biography of the president and find about all the machinations he went through, he himself was ashamed of what he'd done. He actually got hold of a letter which he thought would embarrass him in his future career and destroyed it. Sadly for him, somebody had kept a copy. He knew when he was doing it that what he was doing was wrong. None of the other people felt that. None of the other people were trying to play both ends against the middle and pretend to be simultaneously anti-war and to plot to see how this would run in their political careers 20 years from when they were doing it. This man was thinking 20 years ahead, how is this going to look? And can I hide it? And the interesting thing is, and the reason why we know about it, is that he failed to hide it.
Yeah, I remember when I read that letter when it came out during the campaign, pointing out that in my column in The Nation it said his overriding concern was for his future political viability. This is how he was thinking in 1969 when he was at Oxford with me. I thought there was a pretty high order of ambition, but in fact it was rather cheaply conducted. He wanted to live down the fact that he'd been opposed to the war. And it seems to me the irony that the caller wants me to dwell on isn't all that much of an irony. There are a lot of people who are very much in favor of a war for political reasons of their own. Because they aren't brave enough to go and fight it doesn't mean to me that the cause they say they support is thereby invalidated.
I want to know what you think.
I just think anyone who is against the war comes out better than anyone who is for it. I mean, as an average, just no question about that.
On another subject entirely, here's an ad in the New York Times this morning. It says, Brinkley and Russert together. ABC's This Week with David Brinkley, NBC's Meet the Press with Tim Russert, together tonight, 8 p.m. CNBC. Tonight, David Brinkley, one of America's most respected and honored broadcasters, talks with Tim Russert about media standards and ethics, his most interesting interview, the most memorable news story of his career, and Newt Gingrich and the Republican takeover of the Congress. He even gives some advice to future journalists. Will you be watching?
I shall not be there.
You will not be watching, Mr. Peter Hitchens.
Well, I might be. I don't know. I do think that Brinkley's book, Washington Goes to War, is one of the best books on that period that exists. But whether I'll take my admiration to the extent of watching him being interviewed by another journalist, I don't know.
I somewhat prefer him on the page. And I had an aunt, a friend of mine had an aunt who, when she was watching the trailers for upcoming movies in the cinema, would signal disapproval by saying very carringly, I shall not be there.
Photographs in this morning's New York Times of the Iwo Jima statue and the president yesterday. One photograph for an artistic photograph up here, and then down here, the president standing with some veterans. We go to Leadville, Colorado. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Brian. How you doing?
Good, sir. How are you?
Okay.
Up on top of the mountain out there.
Yeah, we're on top of the hill.
What are you doing up so early?
That's the town where Oscar Wilde came to give his lecture to the miners.
I get up early and do a little office work before I go out in the field.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a plumber.
And what brought you to the phone this morning? Something made you mad?
Well, I wanted to respond to the caller that expressed displeasure of the president being at the Iwo Jima Memorial. I just wonder if he would find it more pleasurable to, if there was a a Republican president like Graham or Gingrich or maybe even Dick Cheney, people who also avoided the draft, but they also supported that war till the bitter end.
Were you in the military?
No, I was not. I, like Bill Clinton, thought the war was wrong and refused to cooperate with it. And at least that is a consistent view. I have a problem with these Republicans that, as I said, supported that war to the bitter end, but maintained their student deferments and did what they could to avoid military service.
Mr. Peter or Christopher Hitchens?
Well, didn't we just do all that?
Yes. Okay.
With respect, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Leadville, and thank you. Hope you enjoy your day as a plumber out there and on top of the mountain near the Great Divide.
In the time where Oscar Wilde came to give his lecture to the miners. We should have asked him to talk about that. About 100 years ago now.
Here's a fax. By George, what an idea. C-SPAN could start with a point-counterpoint with Barbara Streisand and Charleston Heston. This is from David Dyer of Orlando, Florida.
Moses versus Yentl.
What articles by Christopher Hitchens can we look forward to reading next? This is from M.J. Downey.
That's not Morton Downey Jr., is it? Well, Mr. Downey, nice of you to ask. Coming up, a piece on Oscar Wilde, actually, whose centennial year this is, in my opinion. It's the year when he first put the importance of being earnest on the stage, and it's which is one of the great socialist plays ever written. And it's the year of the centenary of his 3 acts, also 3-act play of his trial, or trials. And I've done a profile of Sunset Boulevard. The play, no, the street. Not the musical, not the film, not the play, the street. One of America's longest, about 24.5 miles of it, goes all the way from Union Station, downtown LA, to the sea, to the Pacific. Where it stops, America stops.
Did you go to see it?
It's my mood piece, curtain raiser, whatever you want to call it, conversation piece, introduction to the Hollywood issue of Vanity Fair, which will come out next month. And I remember thinking when I got the assignment, why don't you walk up and down Sunset Boulevard and see what you want to say about it, that it was a lot better than working for a living.
And you did.
It actually turned out to be quite hard.
You walked the 24 miles?
I had to take quite a few cabs because there was they arranged for there to be a flood in California when I was there. I took Billy Wilder for a drive, the director of the original Sunset Boulevard. Very old now, but completely compos mentis, absolutely brilliant guy. And we had a great time. He pointing out to me where all the old clubs and spots used to be.
Peter Hitchens, if people want to read the International Express, can they buy it anywhere in the United States?
No, you can only buy it in big cities, and I'm afraid places where expats, Brits, congregate. But you can subscribe. I'm sorry, I don't have the address with me, but it's possible.
Have you thought about writing a book about your experience in the United States?
No, when I left Moscow, I swore I would be the only Moscow correspondent who didn't write a book about the collapse of the Soviet Union, and I'm not proposing to write a book about the United States either.
When will you go back home?
This September, I think. That's my plan at the moment, yeah.
Fax. Thank you for covering Barbara Rodham Streisand's speech at Harvard University. Between her dramatic size and moments of staring silently, I guess, like a deer in the headlights at the audience, she proved what Rush and Mr. Newt have been saying all along. The elitist liberal left lacks substance and has no idea of what's on the mind of the average American. Perhaps in Ms. Streisand's next movie, she could play the part of a rich, liberal, elitist movie star and singer who finds herself mysteriously transported to a blue-collar neighborhood in Muncie, Indiana. The name of her character would be Not a Clue.
Muncie, Indiana is the original Middletown, isn't it? I've been there once. It's where the Linds decided to profile Mr. and Mrs. America. I think Barbara Streisand would hold up very well in Middletown. I mean, look, I didn't see the speech, but I read it. It didn't seem to be that bad a speech. I thought I detected the hand of a friend of mine as a speechwriter in it.
Last call, Fayetteville, Arkansas. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Brian.
Hi.
I want to talk about Dr. Foster. It seems to me, I think most thinking people, that adequate obstetric care will necessarily include some abortions. Even some planned pregnancies will take a bad turn and be life-threatening to the mother. Some examples are ectopic pregnancies, which right now is about 1 in 100 pregnancies will be ectopic and is rising.
Did you follow Dr. Foster when during his career at all? I mean, did you know him before he was nominated from Tennessee?
I didn't know him. I didn't know him. This is a new thing.
Do you think anybody will listen to your analysis of this in this debate.
Yes, I think you will listen. And the brothers will listen. Maybe they'll write about it. So if they'll get out their pencils, I'll tell them a couple of more life-threatening conditions. Cystic hygroma, hydatid molds. Now, nevertheless, many obstetricians won't do abortions, or they don't know how to do abortions, even to save the life of the mother. These women are sometimes forced to travel to another state or even 2 or 3 states before finding help.
It's a terrifying issue on which to pronounce and to try to tell anybody else what to do. But anybody who isn't disturbed by the idea of abortion seems to me to be lacking in several important human qualities. And to think that it's not important, and that is the fault which is detected in Dr. Foster and in the White House. To think that it's not important, that it didn't matter, that it could be glossed over, was a very, very serious mistake and character defect.
I have a fax that I want to read here. This is a tough one.
Could I just say one thing about this? Only a tiny thing. Well, I think it's all Clinton's fault for firing Jocelyn Elders, which was another of his acts of cowardice and stupidity. There was a woman who was doing very well in her job and was raising important questions about the ridiculousness of the war on drugs, the necessity for candor in sex education and so forth. He fired her in a contemptible way to try and ingratiate himself, unsuccessfully, with the Gingrichites. This is what he gets for it, someone else who shares his attitude towards moral evasion.
Got a fax I want to ask you about. Jerome Bird says, "Dear Mr. Lamb, why do you like the liberal Hitchen better than the conservative one?"
How can he tell?
How can he tell?
And do you? I'd be terribly offended.
It's really interesting because everyone always says about you that they can never tell what side or line you favor.
He probably, because I laugh at you. I don't mean laugh at you. We chuckle, and you say things that are humorous. But that's interesting.
Then you'd have me on later in the day. We could do a great after-lunch show.
Well, I once had a woman come up to me and say, "Why do you hate Ross Perot?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "Well, every time you mention his name, your right eyebrow goes up." Have I been unfriendly or more friendly to your brother than
well, I haven't spotted it. But I shall check on the video and
I will check myself.
Let you know.
Here is a from Dale Yancey of Merrimack, New Hampshire. What do you know about Alan Keyes, who happens to be black as opposed to the pro-term African-American, PC term African-American? He was one of the candidates who spoke at the Republican dinner in Manchester, New Hampshire last night. I was greatly impressed by what he said. He's over here in Baltimore. Do you know anything about
He ran for Senate against Sarbanes for a bit. He was William Kristol's roommate, I believe, at Harvard. And like William Kristol, who's emerging as the sort of main Republican thinker, Kristol as in Kristol, I mean to say, not Billy Crystal. He seems to have fallen under the sway of Leo Strauss, a quite interesting reactionary classicist German philosopher whose followers form a sort of cult on the right wing. It's worth looking up, actually. You can, gosh, it's a hard question to answer quickly, but I mean, I know quite a lot about Keyes.
Peter Hitchens, this is from Doc Gring. Do you think General Colin Powell will be a candidate for the presidency, or more realistic, a vice presidential partner?
I don't think he will. Listening to what he had to say, I think he has serious doubts about his own wishes to go through with the candidacy. And my bet now will be that he will not do it. Not this time, anyway.
In your expose of Mother Teresa and Vanity Fair, Christopher, you said that, quote, "If you give a man a reputation as an early riser, that man can sleep till noon," unquote. This is because the media culture tends to, quote, "judge people's actions by their reputation." Don't you think you've assigned a bad reputation to President Clinton? He's really a Republican. He waffles, etc. And no matter whether a given decision of his can be explained in a more favorable light, you'll always choose the worst interpretation.
I'll always expect the worst interpretation to come out right, yes. Because I think that there's no core or bottom of principle involved. So even when I think it might be something I don't object to, I will always have the suspicion that it might be being embarked upon for the wrong reasons and would be dumped if it didn't suit the president. So yeah, I mean, I have a pretty rooted distrust for the guy, painfully earned, I may say.
Here's another one. C-SPAN, yes. Streisand, no. In fact, hell no. Dell from Michigan. Surprised that people are so excited about.
Well, I tell you why, because it enables a lot of very stupid people to make a point about the liberals all being elitists. And for some reason, this is a necessary belief among certain practitioners of the politics of resentment. And because Barbara Streisand is rich and lives in Bel Air or whatever it is, they feel they can make this point with huge satisfaction.
Well, there is a point that only very rich people can afford to be left-wing because they don't have to worry about their taxes. And it's becoming more and more apparent as the years go by that that's who they are.
Well, I'm incredibly rich now, but I was very much the same politically when I was incredibly poor. So you couldn't prove it by me.
We're out of time. Any new things about America that surprise you the longer you're here?
The feebleness of the death penalty, which I had thought when I was in Britain was something which existed here, and I now realize is pretty much a fantasy. People don't get executed until they've forgotten what they are being executed for.
Christopher Hitchens, anything about your brother, now that he's here in your same town, that surprises you about his reaction to the United States?
No, nothing that surprises me about that. He's, I think, been quite influential on some American conservatives in sort of beefing up their style a bit, and he'll be remembered by them after he's gone and perhaps leave a footprint or two. And they certainly needed a bit of help in beefing up their style. As to things that, as long as I stay here, I'll never get over, people telling you what church they go to if you sit next to them on an airplane, and people telling you about going to their shrinks. As long as I live, that will always amaze me. People who've just been introduced to you, will tell you, of course I'm a Congregationalist, and then they'll say, as I was saying to my shrink only the other day. I like it, actually.
Here I go again, laughing. I apologize for laughing.
It will never seem ordinary to me.
What do you tell them?
I keep my counsel. I refer them to my confessor, Mrs. Teresa of Calcutta.
And I wish there was some way that the audience could read Brit Twit by Richard Rodriguez. Maybe...
Anyone in San Francisco can get it by reading yesterday's Examiner, which can't be that hard to do, and in Baltimore Sun today.
It'll probably be in other papers.
It'll probably, yes.
Because it must be syndicated by somebody.
Yeah, I'll make it my job to find out who.
All right, Christopher Hitchens and Peter Hitchens, brothers from Great Britain, and one here with the International Express and the other here with Vanity Fair and The Nation and other places. We thank you both very much for joining us. This is President's Day, and we're going to talk more about presidents, and we'll have open phones. This is also a day that our cameras are at the Frederick Douglass home in Southeast Washington, a place called Cedar Hill, and we're going to be back talking with Bill Clark, the ranger that's in charge of that house, in a few moments. But first, our address, if you want to reach us here at the Washington Journal, 400 North Capitol Street, Suite 650, Washington, D.C., 20001. Our telephone numbers on the screen, 202-626-7963, and the fax number, 624-0762, and that's our internet address, C-SPAN guest at AOL.com. Always wondered about that romantic way that they have those addresses. I wonder how long we'll have C-SPAN guest at AOL.com. We'll be back after this short break.
Washington Journal continues in a few moments. Now, a recent stop along the route of the C-SPAN school bus. The Science Center of Iowa was a recent stop for the C-SPAN school bus.
Science Center of Iowa is dedicated to bringing science and technology literacy to all of the people of Iowa, with a special emphasis on children and their families. The Science Center is best known for its hands-on exhibits, and these particular pieces can range anywhere from basic physics experiments to life science programs and even astronomical sciences. Some of the classic exhibits that you might find at the Science Center would be to be able to literally put your hands inside a tornado. Another example would be optics and light principles. And one of the areas that the Science Center is quickly growing a reputation for is our area called Small Discoveries. Small Discoveries is an area for children under the age of 7, and it's all kinds of hands-on activities and minds-on activities that generate and foster enthusiasm for science. And we're really keen on this space because it really gives young girls and others who don't have an opportunity or might not be thought of as being excited or being interested in science an opportunity to explore. Well, right now the Science Center is featuring one of Iowa's most exciting programs. It's called Tales of Dinosaur Island, and it's a feature on dinosaurs. It's an interactive approach to dinosaurs. These particular dinosaurs, including Allosaurus and hands-on T-Rex, are all creatures that not only move, but are incredibly lifelike and realistic. We've tried to place them in a setting so that the people who visit the Science Center can get as close as possible to the dinosaur, and you get a real sense of what it must have been like to be next to a Parasaurolophus or a Triceratops, for instance. And in this particular show, we're pleased because we not only have the parent-sized dinosaurs, but we also have several of the babies. So it really translates very well, not only from little children all the way up to full adults.
We'll return to Washington Journal in a moment. First, some program information. Here's some of what's ahead today, President's Day, on C-SPAN. At 10 a.m. Eastern Time, a speech by Senior White House Advisor George Stephanopoulos. At 4:45 this afternoon, a New Hampshire Republican forum featuring potential presidential candidates. Tonight at 8 Eastern Time, a conversation with the President. We sat down recently with President Clinton to discuss his first 2 years in the White House. Following that, at about 8:30 p.m., a look at the Lincoln Collection at the Library of Congress. That's some of today's program lineup. Follow proceedings in the House and Senate with the 1995 Congressional Directory. To order, send a check or money order for $12.95 to C-SPAN Publications, 1616 Main Street, Lynchburg, Virginia, 24504. Or call 1-800-523-3174. The directory will be ready for shipment in mid-March. Now, back to C-SPAN's Washington Journal.
"20 Years of Congress." There you can see way back in the 1800s by James G. Blaine, volumes 1 and 2. And we're looking at a bookshelf in Frederick Douglass's home, the home in which he died when he was 77 years old. It was 100 years ago today. And that is wall-to-wall books. You'll see his desk here in a few moments. We learned earlier from Bill Clark that he spent as much as 5 hours a day in this room, I believe. And you can see the glasses there. And there's Bill Clark, who is a ranger with the National Park Service and in charge of this house. And is this the room he did spend 5 hours a day in?
Yes, sir, Brian. Mr. Douglass believed in preparing himself for any situation. And for the most part, he would study that situation, and he would spend a lot of time in this library preparing himself for speeches, preparing himself to clearly think through anything he had to do in the coming times. He had to prepare himself because he knew he would be faced with all types of animosity and people who would simply try and hold him back from what he was trying to achieve.
I've got the flyer that you pick up at the Portrait Gallery, and I know you can't see it. It says "Majestic in His Wrath," and there's a picture of him. Is this going to help bring people? Are they making any effort over there at the Portrait Gallery to suggest that people come to his home?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Brian. They are trying so hard at the Portrait Gallery to make people understand more so. They have taken their constituency that comes to the Portrait Gallery and are sending them here to us at the Douglass home so they can learn more about the life and times of Frederick Douglass. Those folks there have been so instrumental. People like Mrs. Cox and all have done so much to make sure that their people who come there, and they have millions of people come to the Portrait Gallery, are sent right here to us at the Douglass home.
Now, if someone is visiting and they're at the Capitol, how long would it take them to drive to where you are right now?
Well, again, Brian, they can take us roughly, stopping at all the lights, coming Pennsylvania Avenue to 11th Street, coming across the 11th Street Bridge. It should take them more than about 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
Parking is easy where you are?
We have a parking lot and a visitor center here.
What's it cost to take a tour of the home?
Absolutely nothing.
What will they see when they come there? You mentioned earlier about a film. How long's the film?
Yes, we have a 17-minute orientation film. In fact, you can purchase a 33-minute version of the film in our visitor center bookstore. We have an elaborate library, I should say bookstore rather, that has all types of books on Frederick Douglass, the lives of blacks throughout history who meant something to our country. We have a beautiful exhibit on Frederick Douglass down in our visitor center, and then you will be escorted upstairs by our very, very intellectually inclined rangers, of course, and you will be given a tour where we can direct information to you on his various changes through life. We can tell you about his Civil War involvement. We can tell you about his abolitionist involvement. We can tell you about his women's suffrage movement involvement. We can tell you so much about Mr. Douglass here, and all you have to do is ask.
Bill Clark, how long have you been in the Park Service?
Well, sir, 25 years.
Where were you before you came to the House? What was it, 3 years ago?
Well, yes, sir. Well, actually, 2 years ago, I was down in the Public Affairs Office doing media relations work and trying to enlighten people visually and conceptually with what the National Park System is trying to do here in the nation's capital.
What else is in that room that people like to see?
Amazingly enough, for instance, as you look up here to your right, you'll see a portrait of Susan B. Anthony, a very, very strong woman who was instrumental in helping women become free and equal. In those times in the 19th century, women couldn't even do things such as speak loud in public without being harassed and arrested. They couldn't vote. They couldn't have many of the rights that most men had in those times. And Susan B. Anthony, with the help of Frederick Douglass and many others, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, for instance, helped create an atmosphere where women can be free and independent as they are today, and are striving to be even more so tomorrow. But now as you look further over this way towards, say for instance, these canes here on the floor by the desk, these are the canes that Mr. Douglass would use to, say, stroll from here to the Capitol. I say stroll because at 59 years old, up until the time he was about 70 years old, Mr. Douglass would use these various walking sticks to of course, stop and talk to all the number of people he would see between here and the U.S. Capitol building, where he worked as the U.S. Marshal and later on as the Recorder of Deeds.
Now, being a U.S. Marshal back in those days was how important?
Very important. In fact, Mr. Douglass had a very, very, very important job to our nation. Not only did he have the badge and the gun and the authority of a U.S. Marshal and the arrest rights and to serve warrants and all that, but Mr. Douglass had a very prestigious aspect of his job, where he had to introduce our President of the United States to other visiting dignitaries of state.
How tall was Frederick Douglass?
Well, if I may give you an example, if he were wearing my Ranger hat today, he would be this tall. He was 6'3" and well over 250 pounds. So he was quite a towering person, because most people of the 19th century then were about 5'4", 5'5".
What's the favorite thing that people point to when they see this room?
Well, look over here toward the desk. Mr. Douglass wrote several autobiographies. This one here is the very first one. This is the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave. But also, here on the top of the desk is the autobiography he wrote here at Cedar Hill, Life and Times of Frederick Douglass. Now understand this, the very first book chased him out of the country because he told what his original name was, which was Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, which he changed when he escaped at 20 years old to Frederick Douglass. But now here in this other book, The Life and Times, it tells you all the things inclusive of his life and times, because he had learned well enough how to write and communicate better by the time he had moved here, and he was able to tell you about his worldly travels and his abolitionist activities.
As I remember, that downstairs in your, and there's a picture right now on the screen of Mr. Douglass sitting at his desk in that room. But as I remember, downstairs in your shop down there, you can buy those, that biography, that autobiography?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you can buy all three autobiographies. The first one was the narrative. The second one was My Bondage, My Freedom, which told about his abolitionist activities. And the very last one, the third one, which he wrote here again, was Life and Times of Frederick Douglass. And they are all on sale here in our National Park Service bookstore that's operated by the Parks and History Association. And I might remind all of your viewers that anytime you purchase a book from the Parks and History Association, no matter where it might be in the city, you help support the National Park System.
Bill Clark, how many kids do you have?
3.
Are they old enough to have been to the home there? And
absolutely.
how old are they?
Well, my oldest is 16, Rashida. My young man, Jason, is 11. And my youngest daughter is Christina. She'll be 4 years old soon.
And which one of the 3 like that home the best?
I'm not sure. I think they argue about who's the better orator.
And what's their favorite thing in the home?
Well, believe it or not, my daughter Rashida likes books. And I think she wants to emulate Mr. Douglass's writing abilities because she is a great communicator. In fact, she's a young lady who attends School Without Walls, one of the better schools here in D.C., as an 11th grader, but she's also attending George Washington University on a scholarship.
How old?
Well, 16 years old.
And she's in George Washington University already? How come?
Yeah. Well, she was able to work it out with the school where she could achieve, as Mr. Douglass achieved, that is, education being the key to freedom.
Bill Clark, we will be back to you in a moment or two and talk some more about the Frederick Douglass home.
Great.
Thanks for joining us this morning. Thanks for your extra help. And we have open phones. First up, Danbury, Connecticut. What's on your mind?
Well, first of all, my compliments to Mr. Clark. He's renewed my interest in the National Park Service. And, you know, I noticed he has a striking resemblance to Reginald Martinez Jackson, of course, Mr. October. And if the baseball players don't feel like playing this year, they ought to fan out across the country, and maybe we'll get some kids interested in our national parks. One thing I did want to say, I think that's little known as far as President Clinton being at Iwo Jima. The Iwo Jima was originally the main battalions were the 1st, 2nd, 3rd Battalion of the 26th Marines. Of course, then it was the 5th Division. I was at the Siege of Quezon, and under a threat of fire, the mess tent brought out a cake, and it was the first time the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Battalion of the 26th Marines were together since Iwo Jima, and I think in that sense, I have a little resentment towards the president being there. And also, Brian, if you get a chance, repeat that May 20th book notes interview with Lou Poet, please. Thank you for listening.
By the way, caller, what would your are you still there? I think he hung up. I was going to ask him what his reaction would have been, like Christopher Hitchens said earlier, if the president had not gone. Is it Sequim, Washington?
It's Sequim, Washington.
Oh, I don't know why I'm seeing something else on my screen. Sequim, where is it?
Sequim is in the northwest corner of the state of Washington.
How far from the water?
Well, we're right on the water looking over at Victoria, British Columbia, Canada.
And what brings you to the phone at 6:09 in the morning?
You know, I wake up this early in the morning just to talk to you.
Aren't you nice? Thank you.
I want to say congratulations. I think you're going to go down in history as the one man who took the most heat for doing a job almost perfectly. I can't imagine a more objective journalist, and I just wanted to say so someday.
That's nice. Thank you very much. What has gotten you? Have you had a chance to get to the paper this morning?
Well, no, I haven't. We have a couple of newspapers. One of the local ones that will probably receive some national attention eventually is a new one. It's called the Citizen News, and it takes a rather conservative opinion to the pages of a new local newspaper. But anyway, what I wanted to address this morning is a couple of things. One, I'm a young person, and I'm very interested in the arts. And yet I think I may be in a real minority in that I take a rather favorable view of two people. One would be Frederick Douglass, on whom the morning you've done a lot of concentration on the life of Frederick Douglass, and I'm pleased to see that. And also Newt Gingrich. I see a remarkable correlation between the two gentlemen, and I believe they're both revolutionaries for their time.
Thank you very much for the call. As a matter of fact, those of you who are interested in this whole discussion about the arts, here is on your screen in the USA Today, back in the Life section, a whole discussion about the National Endowment for the Arts finds itself immersed in art of survival. And this will show you how much they've spent over the years. As a matter of fact, the largest expenditure in any one year was 1979 when they had $308 million, and it's gone down since then. And it's broken down along here as to how much is spent in the states. And the budget this year is $167.4 million. And it points out a number of this, over here in this corner, some of the specific grants that they have made. On this President's Day, February the 20th, 1995, we go next to Ridgewood, New Jersey. Good morning.
Oh, good morning, Brian. I wanted to point out to your listeners an article in the Recent Human Events. It's a National Conservative Weekly, and it's an article that previews or the importance of C-SPAN and what you've done, and it also points out the danger of this must-carry law. It points out that C-SPAN has been curtailed or shut down in 4.4 million households because of this law.
Who wrote the piece?
A woman by the name of Marilyn Duff.
Oh, yes. Marilyn Duff. Yeah, no, I haven't. Marilyn Duff communicates with us. She's from Orange County, California, I think, and writes from that area, but I didn't know that she had this piece. I know she's been writing about this issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a nice article on you and the history of C-SPAN, and it really does it justice. And I was wondering if you'd ever have anyone from Human Events on your Washington Journal.
Oh, yes, thanks. Alan Riskin has been on this show many times. He hasn't been to the Washington Journal show, but we'll invite him back. And it's a very small organization. Alan has been there forever. probably by now 30, 35 years, along with Tom Winter. And, but that's a good suggestion, like the other ones that we had earlier. By the way, in the Philadelphia Inquirer, they're writing about a senator. This is on the op-ed page, the commentary page, that is right across the bridge from them over in New Jersey, Bill Bradley. And this is Ross Baker's piece. It says, does civics speech hint at White House run? And this is the speech that he gave that you saw on this network at the National Press Club. And over here on the right, they put excerpts this morning. And of course, there is the a caricature of Senator Bill Bradley, the senior senator from New Jersey. As we go next to Visalia, California. Good morning.
Good morning.
What's on your mind?
Well, first of all, thank you for an excellent show, Brian.
Thanks.
I think the problems that we're having a lot with the Democrat-Republican issues are really coming down to who do they represent. I mean, we're looking at the Republicans, whether their views are conservative or not, are representing business. I mean, they've been representing business for years and years, and Democrats do tend to represent people with special interests also, but they're representing people. And whether Clinton's doing a good job or not, it's who he's representing, and I think he's representing people. And more so than Newt Gingrich, who's obviously representing special interest in publishing and other areas, and Dole, who represents other big interest areas such as farm and agriculture, and Graham, who's military industrial. So I think really what it comes down to is you're voting for who's representing you, and I think Clinton's represented me a lot better than any of them would.
Thanks. Let me show you a photo in USA Today that is Mrs. Clinton seated and their daughter Chelsea standing behind her, and this is going on the cover of a program of the American Ballet Theater, and the headline on the piece right above that says, Ballet Company lands a powerful patron. And by the way, this program, Washington Journal on this President's Day, when most of Washington is closed, is produced, as it always is, by our executive producer, Connie Broad, who you see out here many times doing what I'm doing this morning, getting double duty. Katie Cole comes in overnight and gets us all ready for the morning. And Peter Slan makes sure that we've got the right questions to ask, the right material, and the bios, and gets all these guests in here, and they all work real hard, and we thank them. And we go to Washington, D.C. next. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Brian.
Hi.
I wanted to comment on all the talk that's been on Barbara Streisand this morning. One of your last guests suggested that maybe all the animosity towards her was because of her fame and her fortune, and I don't feel that way towards her at all because of her fame and fortune. I saw her a couple weeks ago on CNN promoting a movie I think she executive produced, the Margaret Kammermeyer story.
Uh-huh.
And she, in this interview, she had said that she hoped people would watch this movie and get a dislike of the military. And I can't figure out for the life of me why anyone in America would want people in this country to dislike the military.
All right, sir. Thank you. By the way, those interested and have C-SPAN too, she's over there right now on videotape, rerunning of the Harvard speech. And we go next to Long Island. You're next. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Brian.
Hi.
I heard a reference last week, and then now we last guessed about the John Birch Society. I wonder if you could tell us who they are and what do they stand for.
Well, I'm not about to define the John Birch Society. They used to be based in Belmont, Massachusetts. We've had John McManus on this network, who has been running it on several occasions. And the best thing I can do for you is suggest that we bring him back and let him define what the John Birch Society is and how big it is and where they're headquartered for sure and what they're doing today. But thanks for the inquiry. We go next. By the way, here's the lead editorial in this morning's Washington Post is the Ron Brown probe. The Justice Department's decisions to launch a formal investigation of Commerce Secretary Ronald H. Brown's personal finance interest is not an inconsequential act, is the way this editorial leads off. As we go next to Nashville, Tennessee. Go ahead, please.
Hi, how are you, Brian?
I'm fine.
Got through this morning.
Welcome.
I'm sorry, let me turn my TV down here. I'm an African-American who lives here in Nashville, Tennessee, and I've become quite angry over the past several months with what's going on. I think there's a lot of cold words that are being put out there, a lot of rhetoric, whereas the blame is being put on minorities and women as if the fault of country is black people's fault. Like all the people on welfare are black women. All the people who commit the most crime are black.
What's the code word? Give us a code word that you hear.
Okay, well, welfare queens, quota queens, what they issued on Lonnie Guinier, quota queens, welfare queens. Every time you see somebody on welfare on TV or in a magazine article, they're black, mainly. And it just disturbs me. I think it's, the blame is always on African Americans or people of minority. And I must say, if it weren't for liberals or liberalism, my sister, who was an engineering student at Tennessee State, would not have gotten a co-oping position, I don't believe, with the Air Force, or my father would not have been a teacher and gotten the money, you know, have made a better living as a teacher in these days than he would have quite a while ago.
Where'd you get your education?
The University of Tennessee, Knoxville.
And what do you do for a living?
I'm a radio announcer.
Where?
Here in Nashville.
Is it a talk show or a music show?
No, music show.
Thanks a lot for calling.
Thank you.
Nice to talk to you. We go to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania next as we look at a cartoon in this morning's Washington Times, and it refers, by the way, to the problems of Washington, Wall Street junk. That's referring to bonds, and this is Washington in the background. This is by Garner. And go ahead, Philadelphia.
Hi, Brian. My name's Chris. I'm calling from Philly. I was watching your show last night, or the New Hampshire primary dinner with all the Republicans. Now, I'm from Philadelphia, and our inspector senator is running for president, which makes me laugh because he claims to be a liberal, I guess, Republican, but we all know him in Pennsylvania is nothing more than a Democrat. Over the last couple, I guess, year or so, we've heard a lot from liberal Democrats of how they have to be different from Republicans. I'm starting to see that now there are Republicans trying to be more like Democrats. He wants us to take the plank out of the policy, out of the national policy for being pro-life. And I think that's the one thing that differentiates Republicans and Democrats. And as Republicans do take that out, I think we're going to lose the presidency and lose the trust of American people if we're seen cowering to, I guess, the pro-abortionists and the liberal Democrats who say it should be out of politics. I think it should because it is a national issue and it is a moral issue that Americans have to fight for.
All right, thank you very much for the call. We have an interesting fax here. It says here, are your excellent camera persons and control room staff allowed to close up on entire printed articles? You reference, you know, that is the Brit twit. We addicts who videotape Washington Journal, et cetera, could then study the whole story on pause, Ray Mills of Tustin, California. And the answer is absolutely. Let's see if we can't do that. I'm not, we need to get a fairly tight shot of this right there. And what I'll do is I'll take you through this, and then you can put it on slow. Those of you who do tape this particular, this is a piece by Richard Rodriguez in which he takes on Christopher Hitchens this morning, and also some of the other, what he calls Brit expats, expatriates. In this morning's Baltimore Sun, as Christopher Hitchens told us, this was also published in San Francisco yesterday, and he'd already been informed by a friend of his out there and had been faxed in, and that's it. And I'm sorry for those of you who didn't have your videotape running. We have another question here that from a viewer on a fax. So let's see here. When will you be repeating Hitchens and Hitchens? And I'm told by Kitty Cole that's at 2:50 p.m. today. That's East Coast time for those of you who want to go back and watch closely what the Hitchens brothers had to say. Let's go next to Fenton, Michigan. Go ahead, please.
Brian, how are you?
I'm fine. Good morning. How are you?
Good. Listen, I think that what you should do is somebody ought to take that Mr. Clark that was on there from the Park Service.
He's coming back here in about a minute or two.
Well, I'll tell you what. Tell him to either quit his job or do something and get out into the America and do some talking to all the people, whether they're white, black, brown, green. It doesn't make any difference. But he can become a national role model. I mean, that guy was, he knows where it is. It's education. and we've got to get these kids back in schools instead of stealing hubcaps, and it goes across the whole spectrum. But he's articulate, and he could become a role model for education. He was tremendous.
All right, Fenton, Michigan, thank you. Bill Clark, you heard that.
Sure did.
Do you want to be a role model?
Well, Brian, with the National Park System, each ranger is a role model, and we try the best we can to make folks understand that our history is important. But they must understand who we use for role models in the National Park System, who our heroes are here in our country. People like Frederick Douglass would not be important to us unless he did something for us. And what he did for us was quite positive, just like George Washington, just like Abraham Lincoln. And each person can become a role model, just like I'm trying to be, just like all of our other rangers are trying to be.
Bill Clark, where did you go to college?
Well, I went to Howard University. I should say I attended Howard University as well as Maryland University.
What did you study?
Well, journalism.
Why?
I was a journalist for quite some time here at the National Park System. I had my very first picture published when I was 19 years old in Time magazine. And I've been published time and time again by about several thousand different publications, mostly on the Vietnam Wall and others subjects like that for the National Park System.
Now, if people just joined us, we have a camera, Luis Munoz and others from C-SPAN, Melissa Mathis, I think, is all over there. Kevin McClam is there, and also Jamie Witsaki. You've got the C-SPAN crew this morning. The home is how big? How many rooms?
Well, we have 21 rooms here now. Mr. Douglass bought 14, but he added 7.
And when did he add the 7?
Well, he added that within the first 5 years of living here. He bought the house in 1877, and he had become the very first person of color and African-American to own a home here in Anacostia. And, of course, he set out to do many extensive changes. He added the 7 rooms in the back because he had 20-some-odd grandchildren coming over to stay, as well as many special guests. He also added 2 window boxes into the east parlor.
What room are you in now?
I'm in the dining room, the largest room in the house. And Brian, I've got to tell you, to digress a little bit, this room, of course, is beautiful, immaculate. But Mr. Douglass, as a child, on a plantation, a slave, mind you, enslaved, he had to eat out of a pig's trough. But now look at this room. You have china, you have sterling, you have crystal, you have pewter, you have all the amenities of a rich to middle class to rich person of the 19th century, even today even. But realizing that Mr. Douglass had to fight with 25 to 30 other slave children to get a handful, literally a handful of cornmeal, cold water, and fatback that was sitting on the floor in a pig's trough or sitting on the ground outside on the hot days, it just adds such contrast to the fact of what I've been saying all along about Mr. Douglass, that he used his education, he used the system after he learned about it, and then he went on to do what he did for our country.
How long was he a slave, Bill Clark?
Well, for 20 years. He escaped after 20 years.
Where did he live?
He lived in Talbot County until he was about 7 years old, but then he was sent to Baltimore.
How far is that from here?
About 50 miles. I'm sorry, 1 hour's drive, 60 miles for some folks.
And how did he get out of slavery?
He rode away. He literally rode away to freedom. He borrowed 9 years of his savings from his first wife, Anna Mary Douglass. Not very much money because it only paid for half that train ticket he needed. He boarded a train in Baltimore dressed as a sailor, borrowed his friend's sailor's papers. He sat down on the train, paid the conductor, and rode to New York.
What year did he do this?
1838.
When did he get to Rochester, and why did he go to Rochester?
He went to Rochester because it was considered the closest free state. And he got there very shortly afterwards. In fact, I think it was about a 16-hour, almost 2-day journey because he had to take a train, a ferry, another train, another ferry, and ended up in New York, whereas when he got there, he immediately wrote a letter back to Anna Mary Douglass, I should say Anna Murray at the time, in Baltimore, telling her to join him in New York. They were married and went on to live in upstate New England.
What race were his parents?
That's a big question. We know for a fact his mother was an African American. He believed, as well as many other slaves believed, his father was Aaron Anthony, the overseer of the plantation, not a person of color.
A white man?
Yes, sir.
And what race was his first wife and his second wife?
Well, his first wife was an African American, Anna Murray, a free woman who worked doing domestic chores in Baltimore. His second wife, though, was not a person of color. She was Helen Pitts Douglass. Helen Pitts, a very famous woman, I should say not famous, but her family was famous. They could trace their roots back to the landing of the Mayflower.
That film you showed downstairs in the visitor center suggests that when he married a white woman that there was quite a bit of controversy back in those times. What year did he do that?
Let's see, that was 1884, some 18 months after his first wife, Anna Murray, passed away.
And was there a lot of controversy around the fact that he married a white woman?
Yes, sir, there was. As you know, those times, racism was quite prevalent. And many of his own race said that he was turning his back on his people by doing such a thing. Even his family said so, especially his daughter Rosetta. And then her friends and family turned their back on her. But they didn't care because Mr. Douglass did not see colors. Mr. Douglass said, it's not who your mother was who made you what you are. It's you who make you what you are.
Bill Clark, you told us earlier that you've been in that job for 2 years. Where does this fit on the ladder for you? How important is this job for you?
This job is extremely important. Brian, I've wanted to come here for 10 years because as a journalist, as a communicator, as an educator, being with the National Park System and all, being able to communicate what Mr. Douglass was all about to the entire world is most important. We wouldn't have so many complex problems. They're not really complex if you look at it really deeply. We wouldn't have so many problems, I believe, if more people knew how Mr. Douglass had to live, if more people would pay attention to what he stood for. And that simply is be fair, be equal, and share.
Is his voice anywhere recorded?
No, sir, it's not.
What else in the dining room there do people always comment on?
Well, a very striking story is how Mr. Douglass died here, because he died in this room, Brian. It's really sad, because here he was at 77 years old, seated at this table in this chair. His wife, Helen Pitts, sitting across from him, and they were simply discussing how he had given a talk that morning to a women's suffrage group, talking about equal rights for women.
Was Susan B. Anthony there?
No, sir, she wasn't.
But they are buried in the same cemetery, aren't they?
Yes, they are. Yes, they are in Rochester. But now imagine Mr. Douglass at 77 standing up from this chair and grabbing his heart and then stumbling, falling, literally falling and hitting his head against the wall here and hitting his head on the floor. And then Helen rushing to him to pick his head up off the floor and to look him in his eyes as he closed his for the final time.
What did she do, last question for this segment, after the death?
Very many special things. First of all, she put a ribbon across this chair. And every time she would sit at this table to eat a meal, she would kiss the center of this chair and then sit down and say a prayer to Mr. Douglass. But one very important thing she did for the American people is that she founded the Frederick Douglass Memorial and Historical Association in 1900. And although she died in 1903, and although that association struggled until 1916 when they were joined by the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs, and they continued to do their work until 1962 when President John F. Kennedy signed legislation making this home a National Historic Site. That is what she did for us. She left this legacy, this proud legacy of anti-slavery and equal rights for Mr. Douglass and for the American people.
Now, if someone lives in this general area, can they get in their car today and come see you?
Yes, sir, absolutely. We're open from 9 till 4 with our winter hours. When daylight saving times comes around in April, we'll be changing from that until 9 till 5. And the grounds are open until dark. So we invite everyone to please come here to the beautiful Anacostia area and see the sunrise and see the sunset, because this is one wealth, one grand wealth to the entire nation.
By the way, because you got there so early this morning, you can have my permission to go home early.
Can't do that. Too much work to do.
We'll be back and talk some more about the Frederick Douglass home, which is located in southeast Washington, D.C., and it's called Cedar Hill, and we'll be back with Bill Clark in a few minutes or so. There's another camera, a live camera this morning. Our crew's out busy on this President's Day. In front of the Capitol, they're looking at the Freedom statue way up there on top that was just refurbished a couple years ago, and we watched it put back up there, or her put back up there, after 130 years of sitting up there without being refurbished. We're going to break for a moment and bring you a man who was the head of the Health, Education, and Welfare Department during the Johnson years, Joseph Califano. He has written a book called Radical Surgery, Where's America Headed Next? And we'll come back with more open phones in, 7 or 8 minutes.
Joseph Califano is the author of Radical Surgery, What's Next for America's Health Care. And inside the jacket of this book, the very first line inside the jacket is, never has America's health care system been in such turmoil or peril. Why?
Why? Because one, doctors are demoralized, and they're the key to running the sick care part of the healthcare system. They feel harassed by insurers. Two, there's less trust between doctors and patients. Doctors fear patients will sue them. It's hard for patients to confide in doctors. Three, the fallout from the Clinton proposals was really an earthquake, and the aftershocks are now being felt. There are tremendous pressures from corporate America and buyers of health care to make it cheaper and less expensive, and that means managed care. You know, when doctors have to call and say, can I get this procedure approved, as one doctor told me, and we put in the book, he said, when I call to get a procedure approved and the person on the other end of the phone asks me how to spell it, it gives me a little concern. And the American people are going to begin to feel the squeeze from managed care and the squeeze from making the system more efficient. They'll have a little less time with their doctors. And finally, we're not dealing with the real problems. And one of the points of the book is all the focus is on how do we pay for sick care, not how are we paying to keep people healthy.
What radical surgery do you propose?
Lots of radical surgery. I mean, number one, personal responsibility. Individuals have to take more responsibility for their own health. You know, Americans think that there are miracles, pills, procedures, operations, machines, so they can abuse themselves in any way they want. I mean, they can subject themselves to enormous stress. They can eat or drink whatever they want. They can engage any sexual whim. I mean, I say in the book, if Moses were an American in 1995 and he went to the top of the mountain, the tablets he'd bring back would be Prozac and aspirin, not a set of commandments to guide our conduct. That's number one. We have to give some incentives to do that. We have to make health care more expensive for somebody who smokes and doesn't smoke. We have to say to elderly people, for example, on Medicare, Medicare provides flu shots. It pays for flu shots. If you don't get your flu shot and you get the flu, you should pay for the cost of treating the flu. You have some obligation to take care of yourself. And that's number one. Number two, in research, we spend billions on research. Why? To keep people alive for a few more days of terminal misery. Unbelievably brutal chemotherapy procedures, machines to breathe for us, to pump our blood and what have you. I say, wait a minute. Let's start spending some money on keeping older people independent longer, on dementia, which has plagued poor President Reagan, on incontinence, on osteoporosis for women. That's shrink the period of dependency and save some money. And two, the teenage years, those big 10 years from 10 to 20. If we can get a kid from 10 to 20 without smoking cigarettes, without using drugs, without abusing alcohol, and just with a little sense of exercise, that as an adult, they're home free. They're never going to do those things.
Take us back and give us some perspective on this. This didn't happen overnight. Tell us how our system got to where it is and how we compare to other countries.
Well, we spend much more money per person on other countries than any other country in the world. We're spending about $4,000 a year in 1994. We'll be over $6,000 by the end of the decade. That's number one.
Now, why are we different from those other countries?
Well, one, in some respect, we have tremendous medicine and very expensive technology. Number two, our doctors are much better paid. A bypass doctor in this country, you're probably talking about $15,000 to $20,000 to $50,000. For the superstars in Canada, you're talking about $3,000 to $5,000. Our hospitals are more expensive, particularly the big urban hospitals, which are unionized, which have tremendous labor forces. We have reduced the number of people in American hospitals. We used to have 10 or 15 years ago about 1.2, 1.3 million people in a hospital on a given day. Now we have about 830,000. But the number of people serving them has gone from 800,000 to about 1.4 million. It's become, that's why it's so expensive. But what do we get for it? We have, we're about 20th, 21st, 22nd in the world in infant mortality. Life expectancy is greater in Britain and France and Italy and Germany. We're not getting the big bangs for the bucks we should have. How did we get here? Partly because of our genius, our tremendous scientific genius, partly because for 25 years in this country, we had total third-party payment.
being well insured for health care was like having a credit card and never having to pay the bill. I mean, if you don't have to pay the bill, you're never going to order beer. You're always going to order champagne. You're never going to have hamburger. You'll have steak. You won't have a little piece of haddock. You'll have lobster. And that's what we've been living on, champagne, lobster, and steak.
Our system that you describe and all that it provides, people have certain expectations about what they'll pay and what they'll get. How will people's expectations have to change under some of the things you're hoping to have happen?
Well, I mean, I think, one, people will have to take more responsibility for their own health. Number two, I think we need a lot of cultural changes in this country. I mean, two examples. Dental costs haven't risen the way medical costs have. Why? Well, sure. Not because they're better at they fill more teeth, pull more teeth, and treated more infected gums. Fluoridation, tartar-controlled toothpaste, less sugar in the diet, decline in smoking, and most importantly, white, healthy teeth are one of the essences of being beautiful or being handsome. It's chic to have good teeth. You can go into ghettos in America with terrible health problems, but you'll see very white teeth. And we have to make it chic. We have to make it in to be healthy, to pursue healthy habits, and it's doable.
How do you do it?
Well, I think you do it. Look, this is a country that can sell pet rocks. This is a country that can say to a poor kid or a poor family, spend $175 for a pair of sneakers. I mean, we can do it. We have to take the techniques of persuasion that we use in those areas and begin using them to encourage people to be healthy. We've dropped smoking in this country from 42% to 25, 26% in a period of 20 years. If we can do that with an addictive substance like nicotine, we can do it. The other things we have to deal with the American way of death as well. I mean, that's very important. We have a, we have a feeling, Americans are the only people on God's earth that think death is an option. With all our medical miracles, the death rate in this country remains the same. It's 1 per person. We spend a fortune on people to keep them alive for a few more days, a few more hours, a couple of more weeks. People, we're not going to change that by fiat, but by culture. I mean, people wanting not to be tied to machines, not to be brutalized for the last hours they have on Earth, but to be with their friends, their family, make the transition. Jackie Kennedy and Richard Nixon said, wait, I don't want to be tied to all that stuff. I'd rather be with my children or my wife.
How'd the book come about?
30 years. I mean, I've been at this for 30 years. I've made plenty of mistakes, believe me. I mean, it's wrestling with the healthcare system. I've been pinned as much as I've matted. And I wanted to lay out, I think Washington particularly, and corporate America playing follow the federal leader, are obsessed with financing sick care. That's only one part of the system. Health promotion, disease prevention are another part, and so is research. And I think that we have to look at all parts of the system. We've been trying for 30 years in America to fix the health care system by only dealing with one piece of it. It would be like trying to cure leukemia in a human being by dealing with only one part of the bone marrow. Till we deal with all of it, until we recognize that all kinds of things in America, from butter to bungee jumping, affect our health. We're not going to deal with it. We're not going to have a system efficient enough to provide care for all of us.
You mentioned a few minutes ago about one of the doctors you spoke with. As you talk to people around the country, anything surprise you in particular?
I think what surprised me is how much in turmoil the doctors are, not just because of managed care. They don't know what's going to happen to the system, how harassed they feel. That's number one. The other thing is the tremendous infusion of the profit motive into America's healthcare system. There are mergers taking place everywhere. The big insurance companies are getting into healthcare in a big way, buying doctors' practices. Doctors are selling their practices today the way investment bankers moved from Salomon Brothers to Bear Stearns. And most importantly, the fact that so little of what we do deals with the 3 major problems affecting our healthcare. Substance abuse and addiction. It's a $150 billion ticket of the $1 trillion we spend. We spend very little to try and deal with alcohol, drugs, cigarettes, pills. The aging of America. We're at the dawn of the first 4-generation society in the history of the world. And we have to keep our elderly people healthy. And what you mentioned at the beginning of the show, Lou, the whole problem of technology.
Well, expand a little bit on this, because you mentioned each briefly, substance abuse. What do you recommend?
Substance abuse. Here, I think we spend more than $4 billion at the National Institutes of Health to research cancer, cardiovascular disease, and AIDS. We spend less than 15% of that amount, about less than $500 million to do research on addiction. Yet addiction to alcohol, drugs, tobacco is the #1 cause of those 3 major killers and cripplers. That's #1. On the aging, the point I made, we must focus on keeping senior citizens independent longer. The nursing home business in this country was $2 billion a year in 1965 when we passed Medicare and Medicaid. In 1994, it was an $85 billion a year business. I mean, we can't stay on that trajectory. And every month we reduce the average dependency of senior citizens, we save $5 billion a year in this country. And on technology, I think we have to ask, what's the purpose? What are we doing with technology? You know, in healthcare in America, invention is the mother of necessity. I mean, if we invent it, we need it, and we will use it. And I think we have to, and that part of it creates another kind of problem, which our people must focus on. The ethical, legal, moral, emotional issues that this machinery and these inventions are raising are stunning. I mean, you know, it used to be that if a woman and a man couldn't have a child and they wanted children, they would adopt a child. Today, the statement that you may not be able to have a child for a woman and a man is simply the opening gun for an armada of medical procedures, ranging from all the tests and probing of a woman and a man to in vitro fertilization to sperm banks. The whole world opens up. Those present incredibly difficult human choices for a young couple. And we have to face the fact that we do it. And the Genome Project, I mean, genes. We're looking, you know, we're starting to be able to manipulate genes, and God willing, we'll be able to manipulate genes so we're less cancer prone or less heart disease prone or what have you. But also, suppose there are violent genes. Do we go into a world in which it's 3 strikes and you're sterile? I mean, how do employers, are they going to be allowed access to all this genetic information? Are they going to act on it? We have in this country, in the past couple of years, a woman was ready to kill so her daughter could be the top cheerleader. Another person bashed her opponent's legs in so she could win a skating competition. Now, if women will do that, why wouldn't a woman say, I want to manipulate the genes in my fetus so I can have Miss America or I can have a gold medalist? We really got to think this stuff through.
Early on, too, you mentioned the fallout from the Clinton proposal. Assess kind of what impact that has had and where we go now in Congress and what role Congress and the President have in all this.
Well, I think the Clinton proposal was too complicated, too bureaucratic, but it was like an earthquake. And he did put health care and its costs and its inequities at the top of the American agenda in a way we haven't seen done since Lyndon Johnson struck up the ban for Medicare and Medicaid. Now, the proposal failed of its own weight, too much junk in it. I think what Congress does now and where we're likely to be headed is, 1, insurance reform so that pre-existing conditions will not result in a denial of insurance. 2, ability to carry insurance from one job to another. 3, community rating so we spread the risk more broadly. And I hope Congress will start focusing on the importance of providing more coverage for pregnant women and children, and on some of these issues like substance abuse. In the private sector, the fallout was staggering. I mean, what happened was corporate America and the big buyers of insurance said, wait a minute, we don't want that big bear in here playing with our little puppies. I mean, we'll do it ourselves. And they have put incredible pressure on doctors and hospitals and insurers to bring their costs down, and their costs are coming down. I mean, the really sophisticated companies like Chrysler that understand, I sit on the Chrysler board on a healthcare committee, Chrysler's costs year over year, 1994 over 1993, rose only 1% for active duty employees and only 3% for retirees. That is extraordinary. Now, most companies won't be there, but we're learning how to handle the costs. Now we've got to deal with making the system a little fairer.
You were Secretary of HEW what years?
During the Carter years, from 77 to 79. I worked for President Johnson during the Great Society years, the much maligned but very effective Great Society when we passed Medicare and Medicaid.
From that experience as Secretary, what particular perspective did that give you in doing this book?
Well, I think it taught me, one, I learned the power of cultural change. I mean, we mounted the anti-smoking campaign in 77 and 78, as you'll recall, and it's had a dramatic impact. You know, the Washington Post used to write stories saying, oh, the anti-smoking campaign, it's all smoke and no fire, there's no money in it. We really didn't need money. We needed to remind people how dangerous it was so they'd begin to act on it. I think that is very important. Culture can have a greater impact. Secondly, I think I've learned the limits. There are limits to medicalizing problems. We talk now about, you know, the Surgeon General is going to end teenage pregnancy. Nonsense. It's not a health problem. There were 1 million teenagers getting pregnant in 1978 when I was Secretary. A year, there are 1 million teenagers getting pregnant in 1994 in the United States of America. Why? Because for all those years, we've treated this as a medical problem. I mean, life for a kid is not a bowl of condoms. There's a lot more to life, and we have to recognize there are social problems, religious values are important, family values are important, and that's the way we're going to deal with teenage pregnancy.
What do you want people to take away from reading this book? What do you want them to get out of it, and what do you want them to do?
Well, one, I want them to say, look, we have a sick care system, we should have a health care system. The best way to deal with this is to try and stay healthy. Do modest things. Diet, no smoking, some exercise, take care of ourselves, take more responsibility. What do I want them to do? I mean, I want them to say to their doctor, talk to me, doctor. If you won't talk to me about how I should stay healthy, then fire their doctor and get another doctor that will, and I want them to be willing to pay their doctor to do that. Those are a few of the things. And I want them also, there's a chapter in the book called Free the Congressional 535, okay? Free the 100 senators and the 435 members of Congress from the power of private money. Private money paid $1 billion to put the 103rd Congress in place that whipped Clinton's health care plan. $1 billion. They were not about to slap the wrists, I mean, much less get into a fight with these people who gave them that money. And that's why they weren't about to take on the insurers or the pharmaceutical industry or the doctors or the hospital. I want people to say, look, we'll buy our government. We'll pay to have these guys run for office, and we'll put caps on these costs. We don't want private interest and special interest to buy the government. And then we'll have a health care legislation that makes sense in this country.
The book is Radical Surgery, What's Next for America's Health Care. The author, Joseph Califano, Jr. Thanks very much.
I've enjoyed it very much, Lou.
Our producer tells us that that Washington Monument was dedicated 110 years ago tomorrow. We have a camera on the west lawn of the Capitol, and you're looking at the Washington Monument in honor of President George Washington, this being President's Day. His birthday is 2 days from today. Beyond that is the monument to Abraham Lincoln, and almost like it's like a cross. If you were go walk right to the monument and go to the right would be the White House. If you go to the left would be a monument to another American president, Thomas Jefferson. And that's the Smithsonian headquarters there on the left, the building that is the highest point. And behind all that is Roslyn in Arlington, Virginia. As we continue with the last 7 minutes here of Washington Journal for this Monday. A cartoon that we showed you earlier in the Washington Times, it's a Scripps Howard cartoon. You can see there's George Washington on the left and Abraham Lincoln on the right. It says, "Happy birthday, George and Abe." Go ahead, put it on, and you can see the dunce cap. But underneath it is a fax that we just got in from somewhere in Pennsylvania. Observe President's Day, and it is a statement that somebody wants to make without language, and we'll let them do that. Let's go to more faxes here. We have... Just would like to let you know that I was honored to visit the C-SPAN bus in Anderson, Indiana on Friday, February 17th. I was really impressed by the personnel. Ann Hiddle was very courteous and friendly, as well as the other personnel up to the production manager. And that's tough with our production manager. I have watched the bus since it left Washington on its maiden trip. Keep up the good work. And a comment to this Aaron Hill Jr. of Anderson, Indiana, to the earlier caller from Arkansas. He should thank Bill Clinton. I can remember traveling through Arkansas prior to the late 70s, and one would not think that they were in the United States. Today I see more people working and trying to improve their quality of life. Another fax. This one from William Hopwood of Miami, Florida. Thanks for those camera scenes of Washington area every morning. Brings back many memories. Whatever happened to the old Navy building on Constitution Avenue? It's gone. It was raised a number of years ago, where I spent so many long hours during part of the World War II and Korean period in the Navy communications. Is it no longer there, or am I disoriented? You are not disoriented. It's no longer there. A. Gold of Cherry Hill, New Jersey. I wonder how much of the narrow-minded conservatives' resentment of Barbra Streisand is because she is Jewish. I see a lot of the hatred towards Hollywood and lawyers as veiled anti-Semitism. This is another comment from Liz Page from the Human Events article, and this is from Philip Tyree of Grand Rapids. My faith in C-SPAN profoundly shaken by your decision to feature the poetry of Jimmy Carter, particularly so close to Lincoln's birthday. Lincoln was a verbal genius who couldn't avoid writing poetry even in his prose. Witness, fondly do we hope and fervently do we pray that this mighty scourge of war will speedily pass away. And there's more. Dear C-SPAN, this is from Hugh Frazier of Decatur, Georgia. Did Christopher Left Hitchens see the Q&A part of Streisand's speech at the Kennedy School of Government? The RNC should get a copy of that debacle and disseminate it as widely as possible. Also, if Left Hitchens disagrees with Straussians, that is his prerogative, but to dismiss them as right-wing cult is rather bad form, in my opinion. If you can't say something at least illuminating, don't say it at all. Let's grab a call here. We're going to say goodbye to Bill Clark at the Frederick Douglass home in a moment. Martinville, Virginia. Go ahead, please.
Virginia.
Hi there.
Yes, hi. I'd like to ask you what is going to happen when President Clinton goes to Iwo Jima and the soldiers are up there hollering Semper Fidelis in a real honorable reverence, and he's putting gays in the military. How easy would it be to put the how much could a more conservative president, how hard would it be for him to switch that policy around? Maybe Colin Powell or somebody in there in the military, because from what I understand, the Army itself doesn't really like that policy.
All right, sir. Thanks a lot for the call. We're looking and listening to folks, and this from Stephen Block, Jr. Fix America first, fix America now, stop meddling abroad. When will the rest of the U.S. media join the nation in telling the public what a fiasco the aftermath of Mr. Bush's war in the Gulf has proven to be, the plight of the Kurds now also being devastated by our ally Turkey using U.S.-built F-16s, and third world servant girls still being routinely raped by their Kuwaiti employers with impunity and not a single protest from Washington. Bill Clark. We wrapped this morning up at the Frederick Douglass home. One of our folks asked me to ask you, at what time of day 100 years ago today did Frederick Douglass actually die?
We believe it was in the afternoon, Brian. Mr. Douglass had given a speech that morning, as I said. Now, he was sitting down at supper, we believe, more or less between 2, maybe 4 o'clock, somewhere in there, and about to go to give a speech that evening. And he was waiting for his carriage to come around to the front door to pick him up, to take him to his speech. Now, again, we don't have actual facts to say exactly what time he died. I just haven't read that fact yet, if it's available.
If Mr. Douglass was there with you this morning, what would be the first question you'd like to ask him?
I would ask Mr. Douglass, how can we fix things? Your last caller talked about things that I think Mr. Douglass would agree with, such as stop looking at people as if they were some kind of character, some kind of thing, some kind of gender, some kind of color. Look at people for their humanity. Look at people for their humanity. Look at them for what they're worth, for what they can do with you, not to you.
We have a fax here from Wayne Gray of Maine. Question to you, Mr. Clark. Please ask how Mr. Douglass earned his living. What was his primary source of income?
His primary source of income was several places. For one, it started with his oratory ability. He was paid at one time or another between $100 and $300 per speech per day good money for the 19th century. He also wrote 3 autobiographies, which sold quite well. He also was an editor and publisher of several newspapers and magazines, the most notable being the North Star. He also was a bank president. He was also the recorder of deeds, whereby he had information regarding land. He would buy land at one price and sell it later at another price. In fact, by the time Mr. Douglass passed away here, February 20th, 1895, he was worth between $100,000 and $200,000 in 19th century money. In comparison, we're talking about roughly $3 million to $5 million in our money today.
Are there any living descendants of Frederick Douglass?
Yes, sir. In fact, Nettie Douglass, Mr. Douglass's great-great-granddaughter, and the granddaughter of Booker T. Washington, I might mention, was here for our wreath-laying ceremony on the 14th. And we expect to have many other Douglasses, including Douglas Green, a young man who's in the Army right now, to possibly come by and see us later on. And we expect anyone who might be watching this who is a relative of Mr. Douglass to please contact us and to let us know if we can, say, include them in our activities.
I understand there's some folks from Rochester where Mr. Douglass is buried there this morning?
Yes, sir. In fact, these young people from Rochester are going to come here today to lay a wreath. In fact, they drove all morning, in fact. They told me they were way down in Atlantic City, and they've been driving since 3 a.m., and they came here to place a wreath in front of Mr. Douglass's home here at Cedar Hill. As you know, Brian, his home that was in Rochester, the one he lived in for 25 years, was mysteriously burned down. And so what the young people are doing today is they are placing a wreath on our front door here in commemoration of the life and times of Frederick Douglass, and opposed to for the entire day. We're going to have our flag at half-staff. We're going to try and tell people more about Mr. Douglass's final days here.
Where are these kids from, by the way?
They're from Rochester, sir.
I mean, how old are they? You know?
Well, for the most part, they are grade school kids. I think the youngest being about 10 years old. Now, all these kids are participants in the Frederick Douglass Oratorical Contest, an annual event where we ask young people of all ages to compete with one another in learning, first of all, 3 to 5 minutes of Mr. Douglass's speeches, and then standing before their peers and competing for money. And again, let me mention, Brian, that we do need help with our oratorical contest. We need corporate sponsorship to help us increase the bond, which we're giving out now, which is only $500 for these hard-working young people who are given an opportunity to simply stand in front of an audience, emulate Frederick Douglass, compete with their peers, and actually try and win something to help themselves get ahead. And we also, I might mention, have a literary contest where we ask folks to go out and write what would Frederick Douglass say to the youth of today.
Bill Clark, as you know, and we've got the material here until November 19th of 1995. You can also go to the Portrait Gallery here in Washington and see a display with 80 items in it. The Portrait Gallery, and that's not too far away. It's several miles away, but not too far away from where you are in southeast Washington at Cedar Hill. Thanks a lot for spending this morning with us and letting our cameras in.
All right, Brian, and don't forget, we have lots of good books to sell.
Bill Clark, park ranger in charge of the Frederick Douglass House on our screen. And as we leave, we want to thank Luis Munoz and his crew, and we'll show you the house and be able to show you its relationship to Washington, D.C., because the Capitol is off to the right, not too far away. Thanks for joining us on this Monday morning, President's Day, Washington Journal.
Okay.